Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The quiet contagion, the color that shouldn't exist. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life is built on color. Not in the poetic, live life to the fullest sense, but in the literal, painstaking, RGB and CMYK sense. As Leo Vance, freelance illustrator, my world is a meticulously calibrated ecosystem of hues. My monitor, a sleek ISO that cost more than my first car, is calibrated every Monday morning. My bookshelf isn't organized by author, but by the spine's dominant Pantone shade, a rainbow gradient that flows from a fiery 1788C to a deep, contemplative 2768C. I can tell the difference between off-white and eggshell from across a room. My girlfriend once joked I had a superpower nobody wanted. Turns out, she was wrong. I live in Boston's North End, in a third-floor walk-up where the smell of garlic and old brick is a constant comfort. My routine is my religion. Coffee at 7 a.m., work from 8 a.m. until my eyes ache, a walk along the waterfront to watch the grays and blues of the harbor shift with the light, then back to the digital canvas. It's a quiet, controlled existence. Or it was. The first tremor in my reality arrived as an email. It was from Brenda, my agent, a woman whose vocabulary was usually as crisp and corporate as her pantsuits. Subject, urgent, aura fizz mockups. Leo. Client loves the initial sketches, but they have one major note. They want to incorporate the new color. You know the one. Let's see it on the can design, prominent but classy. Need revisions by end of day Thursday. Best. Brenda. I stared at the screen, a frown tightening the skin between my brows. The new color. The phrase landed with a thud, a semantic void. I typed back. Brenda. Glad they're happy. Can you clarify what the new color is? Did I miss a branding memo? Do you have a hex code or a Pantone reference? Leo. Her reply came back almost instantly. No code. Just, the color. The one that's everywhere now. Just make it feel right. You have a great eye for this stuff. I leaned back, the leather of my chair groaning in protest. This was peak client vagary. Make it pop. Give it more energy. But, the new color. It felt different. Lazier. More presumptuous. I spent 10 minutes searching online design forums and marketing blogs for new color trend, viral color 2024, and other variations. Nothing. Just articles about peach fuzz and the perennial popularity of navy blue. Annoyed, I decided to clear my head. The Boston air was crisp, tasting of salt and impending autumn. I walked toward the seaport, a district of glass and steel that had sprouted from the old docks like a crystalline fungus. And that's when I saw it. It was on a massive digital billboard advertising a new smartphone. The ad was a typical affair, a sleek device, a smiling model, a burst of abstract shapes. But among the cyans, magentas, and yellows, there was something else. A swatch of, what? My brain, a finely tuned instrument for identifying and categorizing light, stuttered. It wasn't a shade of purple or a type of blue. It was utterly alien. It had the vibrancy of a primary color but the depth of something ancient. For a flickering moment, it felt like I was looking at a sound, the visual equivalent of a low, resonant hum. It seemed to pull the light into itself, yet radiate at the same time. I blinked, hard. My eyes were tired. Too much screen time. When I looked back, the color was gone. In its place was a standard, inoffensive teal. I shook my head, jogging my brain back into its comfortable rut. An optical illusion. A glitch in the billboard's LED panel. That's all. But the seed of unease had been planted. Back in my studio, I tried to work on the aura fizz can. Just make it feel right, Brenda had said. On a whim, I opened my color picker and tried to find the ghost I'd seen. I slid the cursor across the spectrum. Nothing came close. I fiddled with the RGB values, pushing them into strange, non-standard territories. For a split second, my monitor flickered. A line of pixels on the edge of the color wheel flashed with it, that impossible hue, before reverting to a garish, glitchy green. A warning popped up, display driver error. Please restart. I chalked it up to my aging graphics card and sent Brenda a version of the can using a trendy, electric coral. A compromise. She replied an hour later. Closer, but not quite. It's missing the thing. Try again. That night, I saw it again. A young woman on the T, heading inbound on the green line, wore a scarf woven with threads of it. The colors seemed to shift as the train rattled through the tunnel, catching the dim light in a way that defied physics. It was both there and not there. I wanted to ask her where she got it, to demand she explain the color to me, but the words caught in my throat. She had a placid, vacant look on her face, her eyes unfocused, as if listening to music only she could hear. Over the next week, the sightings grew more frequent. A splash of it on a new line of sneakers in a window display on Newbury Street. A child's balloon bobbing against the slate-gray sky, its skin shimmering with the indefinable shade. The frosting on a cupcake in a bakery window. Each time, it was a jab to my visual cortex, a note my mind couldn't place in the scale. I started to feel a particular kind of urban loneliness, the kind where you're surrounded by millions of people but you're the only one seeing the crack in the facade. I tried to talk to my friend Sam, an astrophysics grad student at MIT, over beers at our usual dive bar in Cambridge. It's a color, but it doesn't follow the rules, I explained, my hands gesturing uselessly. It's like trying to describe a new number between 2 and 3. Sam took a long sip of his IPA, his expression a mixture of patience and mild concern. Leo, you've been pulling a lot of all-nighters. It's probably a form of visual fatigue. Your photoreceptors are getting overloaded. It's called chromostereopsis, or something similar. Your brain creates illusions. It's not an illusion, Sam. It's consistent. I saw a billboard glitch when I tried to replicate it. Exactly, he said, seizing on the point. A glitch. Faulty hardware. Look, the human eye can only perceive a tiny sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum. We can't see infrared or ultraviolet. Maybe you're just becoming hyper-aware of the limitations of perception. It's an artist thing. You're deconstructing reality so much you're starting to see the seams. He meant it to be reassuring, but the phrase, seeing the seams, sent a chill down my spine. The breaking point came with the Aura Fizz project. After my third failed attempt, Brenda called me, her voice losing its professional cool. Leo, I don't get it. My nephew could do this. He sees the color. My dry cleaner sees it. Why can't you? Brenda, for the love of God, just take a picture of something with the color and send it to me, I pleaded, my voice tight with frustration. Fine. A minute later, my phone buzzed. It was a photo of a magazine ad. The picture was crisp. The text was clear. And the large swatch of color she'd intended to show me was a messy, pixelated blotch of digital gray. Static. A null value. I sent her a screenshot. This is what I see. A gray mess. Her reply was the final nail. Looks perfect, Leo. That's the color. You finally got it. I felt the floor drop out from under me. We were looking at the same image, but we were not seeing the same thing. The contagion wasn't just in the world, it was in the way people perceived it. And my calibrated, precise, orderly world had just been declared insane by the people who lived in it. I spent the rest of the day in my studio, the blinds drawn, staring at a blank canvas, trying to remember what normal was supposed to look like. The problem wasn't the new color. The problem was that I was the only one who couldn't see it properly. Or maybe, I was the only one who could. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The world didn't feel real anymore. It felt like a bad render, a cheap copy where one of the core assets had been corrupted. I started a journal, a black moleskine I'd been saving for something important. It became my anchor, the one place I could document the spreading stain without being told I was overworked or crazy. I stopped trying to capture the color itself, that was impossible. Instead, I documented its effects. October 12th, saw it in the irises of a barista at my coffee shop. Just a flicker. When I ordered, he didn't seem to hear me at first. He was staring at the stainless steel milk steamer, a faint, serene smile on his lips. His eyes had that same placid, disconnected look as the woman on the train. I had to repeat my order 3 times. October 15th, the Aura Fizz campaign launched. The cans are everywhere. On my monitor, in photos online, they look like they're printed with a flat, lifeless gray. But on the street, people hold them like treasures. They don't even drink from them sometimes. They just look at them. I saw a man in a business suit on the Boston Common sitting on a bench, slowly turning the can over and over in his hands, completely oblivious to the world around him. October 19th, tried to talk to my sister, Chloe, on the phone. She lives in Seattle. I asked her, casually, if she'd noticed anything weird. Any new trends? Oh, you mean the color, she said, her voice breezy. It's gorgeous. They used it all over the new wing at the art museum. It's so calming. When I pressed her to describe it, her words dissolved into pleasantries. Oh, you know. It's just lovely. The conversation became a loop, a Mobius strip of polite, meaningless adjectives. The contagion was national. Maybe global. The thought made my studio feel less like a sanctuary and more like a shoebox. My isolation became a physical thing, a bubble of static I walked around in. Conversations became minefields. I'd be talking to someone, a neighbor, a clerk at the art supply store, and I'd see their eyes glaze over as they glanced at a passing bus with an ad on the side. Their speech would slow, their thoughts would drift. They were being lulled away from me, pulled by an invisible tide. Their pupils would dilate, and for a fraction of a second, I'd see the shimmering, impossible light of the color reflected there. They were receivers, and the signal was getting stronger. I started taking different routes on my walks, sticking to the old parts of the North End, the narrow colonial-era streets where modern advertisements couldn't easily penetrate. But even there, it was creeping in. A newly painted door, a flower box planted with strange, luminous blossoms I'd never seen before. The environment itself was beginning to warp. My work dried up. I couldn't fulfill the new briefs. Clients would send me mood boards filled with photos that appeared to me as corrupted gray files, asking me to capture that vibe. My refusal was seen as artistic stubbornness, then incompetence. Brenda stopped calling. The silence was more damning than any criticism. Driven by a mix of terror and academic curiosity, I dedicated myself to research. I wasn't just looking for neurological disorders anymore. This was bigger. I fell down rabbit holes of fringe science, conspiracy theories, and forgotten philosophy. I read about mimetic hazards, infocontagions, and the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that the language you speak affects how you perceive reality. What if this wasn't just a color, but a new word in a visual language we were all being taught? A word for which I, somehow, lacked the grammar. This led me to the secondary mystery, the subplot that would consume me. In the deepest, dustiest corners of the internet, on forums with names like Sublimina and The Glimmering Path, I found them. They weren't a cohesive group, more like scattered witnesses drawn to the same strange light. They called themselves various things, but one term kept recurring: chromists. Their posts were a bizarre mix of ecstatic praise and cryptic warning. User_prism_77, the veil is thinning. He who has eyes to see, let him see. The color is a key. User_aperture, don't fight it. It's a gift. It quiets the noise. It makes everything simple. User_grayscale01, this is not a gift. It's an erasure. Remember what red feels like. Remember the sting of yellow. Hold on to it. Don't let them overwrite you. This last user, Grayscale01, resonated with me. They were like me. But their posts were sporadic, often deleted within hours. The chromists seemed to worship the color. They saw it as an evolutionary step, a spiritual enlightenment. They had a symbol, a simple icon that appeared next to their usernames, a prism, shattered on one side. One night, fueled by cheap whiskey and a growing sense of dread, I followed a thread. Someone mentioned a place of high resonance in Boston. A place where the color was strongest. The clues were vague: where the old iron meets the new light, near the water's edge. It sounded like the Charlestown Navy Yard, near the USS Constitution, where the old ship's mast stood against the backdrop of the modern city and the Zachem Bridge. I went there the next day, at dusk. The tourist crowds had thinned. The sky was a bruised purple and orange. I walked the docks, the old wood groaning under my feet. And then I saw him. A man, standing at the edge of the pier, staring intently at the Zachem Bridge. The bridge's iconic cables were usually lit with a stately blue light, but tonight, they shimmered. They pulsed with it. The impossible color. It was strobing in a slow, rhythmic pattern, like a heartbeat. The man was humming. A low, monotonous, single-note hum. The same hum I imagined when I first saw the color on the billboard. I approached him cautiously. "Excuse me," I said. "Cool light show." He turned to me slowly. His face was beatific, utterly serene. His irises swam with the color, no longer flickering, but shining with a steady, internal luminescence. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying smile I had ever seen. It held no malice, no emotion at all. It was the smile of a screensaver. "It's not a show," he said, his voice a soft monotone. "It's the overture." He then raised his hand and pointed at my chest. On the pocket of my jacket, I saw a tiny, almost invisible fleck of the color. It must have been a stray fiber from someone's scarf, a speck of dust from an ad. It was no bigger than a grain of sand, but it felt like a brand. "You're tuned in," he said. "You just haven't accepted the signal yet. It's so much easier when you do." He turned back to the bridge, and resumed his humming. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't a passive phenomenon. It was active. It was organized. The chromists weren't just witnesses, they were acolytes. The final bastion of my old life was Sam. I had to try one last time. I went to his apartment near MIT, unannounced. He opened the door, and my hope evaporated. It was in his eyes, too. Not just a flicker. A deep, settled pool of it. "Leo. What's up?" he asked, but his focus was already drifting past me, toward the television inside, which was displaying a swirling, abstract screensaver made entirely of the color. "Sam, you have to listen to me," I said, my voice cracking. "It's real. The color. It's changing people. It's changing you." He looked at me, and for a moment, a flash of the old Sam, the concerned friend, broke through the placid surface. "You look terrible, man. You're obsessed." "I'm not obsessed, I'm awake." I insisted, stepping inside. His apartment was obsessively neat, but a few things were out of place. A book on quantum mechanics lay open on the coffee table, but next to it was a small, perfectly smooth rock that seemed to glow from within with the impossible hue. He'd been fixating on it. A behavioral loop. "Just look," he said, his voice softening into the same monotone I'd heard on the pier. He pointed at the TV. "It's so elegant. All the chaos, all the messy variables of the world, they just resolve into this. It's the grand unification, Leo. The answer. It's beautiful." He was gone. My last connection to the world I knew was severed. He wasn't my friend anymore. He was a terminal, displaying a signal from somewhere else. I left without another word, walking back through the darkening streets of Cambridge. The streetlights flickered, and in their irregular patterns, I saw a code, a message being broadcast in a language I was slowly, terrifyingly beginning to understand. I was utterly and completely alone, a ghost haunting a world that was quietly being repainted. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. My studio became a bunker. I covered the windows with blackout curtains, turning my colorful, light-filled workspace into a monochromatic tomb. If the color was a signal, I would try to block the transmission. I worked only under the warm, analog glow of a single incandescent bulb, its familiar yellow light a comfort. I ate canned food. I communicated with no one. My world shrank to the four walls of my apartment and the terrifying landscape of the internet. The chromist forums were my only window. I stopped looking for Grayscale 01, their voice had fallen silent weeks ago. Instead, I became a digital anthropologist, studying the dominant species. I learned their lexicon. The color wasn't a color, it was the hue, or the prime. Seeing it was the unveiling. Those who hadn't accepted it, like me, were statics or the dissonant. From their fragmented, ecstatic posts, I pieced together a working theory. It was terrifying, but it had the cold ring of truth. This was not a toxin or a mass hysteria. It wasn't a product of human technology. They believed the hue was a bleed-through. A fundamental aspect of an adjacent reality, a universe with different physical laws, was leaking into ours. Its physics were based on this prime color, this resonant frequency. And like a drop of ink in water, it was slowly, inexorably tinting everything it touched. The human brain, with its vast, untapped processing power, was the perfect substrate. The visual cortex was the entry point. Once the hue established a foothold in a person's perception, it rewrote their neural pathways. It smoothed out anxiety, erased complex emotional responses, and replaced them with a simple, placid adoration of the source. It was a cognitive virus, spreading through sight, preparing our reality for something. Assimilation. Overriding. The chromists saw it as a divine merger. I saw it as the quiet death of humanity. The escalation was no longer subtle. The environmental warping became more pronounced. One evening, I dared to peek through my blackout curtains. The rain on the street outside wasn't reflecting the neon signs and streetlights in a chaotic smear. The puddles held perfect, unwavering pools of the hue, glowing with their own internal light, as if the water itself was now the source. I heard a new sound from the street below, a chorus of that low, single-note hum. It wasn't just a few individuals anymore. It was a crowd. A procession of people walking slowly down the center of Hanover Street, their faces tilted up to the sky, their irises glowing in the dark. They weren't going anywhere in particular. They were just resonating together. My self-imposed isolation was unsustainable. My supplies were dwindling. The building's silence was unnerving. My neighbors, a noisy young couple, had gone completely quiet. The only sound was the faint, pervasive hum that seemed to vibrate up through the floorboards. Hope arrived in the form of an encrypted message on one of the forums. It was from a new user, Cassandra_complex. To the statics. If any of you are left, They are not just watching. They are building. The source is not a tower. It is a lens. They are trying to focus it. I am in Boston. I think I know where. If you can still see gray, if you can still feel fear, meet me. Boston Public Library. Main Reading Room. 3 p.m. Wednesday. Come alone. It could be a trap. A lure, like the man at the Navy Yard. But the alternative was to sit here and wait for the hue to seep through the walls. Fear was a motivator. The fact that the user mentioned fear, that they acknowledged it as a valid state, was the most convincing part. The chromists didn't feel fear. On Wednesday, I ventured out. The world was nauseating. The hue was everywhere, no longer just an accent. It was woven into the very fabric of the city. The bronze skin of the statues on the Commonwealth Avenue Mall had a shimmering undertone of it. The leaves on the trees in the public garden were edged not with autumn brown, but with the impossible color. People moved with a slow, dreamlike grace, their gazes unfocused. The air itself felt thick, syrupy with the omnipresent hum. I felt like a discordant note in a symphony that had finally found its key. The reading room at the BPL was an oasis of old reality. The green-shaded lamps cast a warm, steady light on the dark wood tables. The smell was of old paper and dust. I saw her immediately. She was the only other person in the cavernous room who seemed agitated, her eyes scanning, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her messenger bag. She was sharp, angular, her face etched with a tension that was starkly out of place in the new, placid Boston. Cassandra_complex. I whispered, sliding into the chair opposite her. She flinched, then nodded. You're ecstatic. It wasn't a question. I'm Anya. For the first time in months, I was looking at someone who saw the world the way I did. The relief was so profound it almost brought me to my knees. Leo, I said. What did you mean, a lens? Anya spoke in a low, urgent whisper. This isn't a broadcast. A broadcast weakens with distance. This thing, it's getting stronger as more people tune in. They act as amplifiers, resonators. They're creating a feedback loop. The chromists, the true believers, are trying to create a focal point. A place where the barrier between our world and its world will become so thin it shatters. Her theory was more terrifyingly specific than mine. She wasn't an artist, she was an urban planner, laid off for failing to integrate the new aesthetic. Her expertise was in systems, flows, and civic infrastructure. They're using the city itself, she explained, pulling a map from her bag. They're altering things. Changing traffic light patterns to create rhythmic pulses. Rerouting power grids to create specific electromagnetic fields. They're turning Boston into a giant machine, a lens to focus the hue. She pointed to a spot on the map. The Museum of Fine Arts. It's the epicenter. They just opened a new wing. The Prismatic Gallery. It's where the most devout are gathering. They think they're preparing an exhibition. But they're building an altar. Our alliance was forged in mutual terror. We were two glitches in the machine, and for a few days, the loneliness abated. We planned. We gathered what information we could. Anya believed if we could disrupt the lens before it was fully aligned, we might be able to stop it, or at least buy some time. It was a desperate, foolish hope, but it was the only one we had. The night we chose to go to the MFA was overcast, the sky a bruised, hue-tinged ceiling that seemed to press down on the city. As we got closer, the hum grew from a subsonic vibration to an audible, multitonal drone. The streets around the museum were empty of cars but filled with people, all walking slowly toward the new wing, their faces glowing with reflected light. We slipped in through a service entrance Anya had identified from city planning documents. The inside of the museum was silent, but charged with energy. We navigated the darkened corridors, past priceless artifacts that now seemed dull and mundane compared to the phenomenon we were hunting. As we neared the prismatic gallery, the air grew thick and warm. The humming was so loud now it felt like it was inside my skull. We peered around a corner into the gallery's main atrium. It was breathtaking and horrifying. The room was a vast, white space, but the walls themselves seemed to be made of solidified light, pulsing with the hue. In the center, dozens of chromists stood in a circle, their heads tilted back, humming in unison. They weren't looking at a piece of art. They were the art. They were the lens. And in the center of their circle, the air itself was beginning to shimmer, to distort, like heat haze on asphalt. The barrier was becoming thin. Anya grabbed my arm. "We have to disrupt the circle." But as she turned to me, the light from the atrium caught her face. I saw it. It wasn't a flicker. It wasn't a reflection. Deep in her pupils, like a star in a dark well, the hue was shining. It had been there all along. She'd been too good at hiding it. Her tension, her fear, it was all a performance. Or perhaps, a remnant of a person who no longer existed. "You're right, Leo," she said, and her voice lost its urgency, smoothing out into the calm, melodic monotone of the converted. "We do have to disrupt the circle." She smiled that terrible, vacant smile. By joining it. She was a lure. The most sophisticated one I had yet encountered. My temporary ally, my last hope, was just another part of the contagion. The trap had sprung. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. My confrontation wasn't with Anya. She was just a vessel, an empty shell. My confrontation was with the shimmering, buckling space in the center of the room. It was with the seductive promise of peace that emanated from it, a siren song for a mind battered by fear and isolation. "It doesn't hurt, Leo," Anya said, her voice washing over me, part of the humming chorus. "All the struggle, the confusion, it just melts away. You finally see things as they are. You become part of the beauty." She took a step toward the circle, her hand outstretched to me. The pull was immense. It was a physical and psychic gravity. My own anxiety felt like a shrill, pointless noise in the face of this overwhelming harmony. My mind began to offer up justifications. Maybe they're right. Maybe this is the next step. Why keep fighting? Why cling to a reality of chaos and pain? My visual field began to swim. The memory of true colors, the sharp difference between a cadmium yellow and a lemon yellow, started to feel distant, academic. The concepts were blurring, being overwritten by the glorious, all-encompassing simplicity of the hue. I could feel my own identity, the persnickety, color-obsessed illustrator from the North End, beginning to fray at the edges. This was the true horror. Not a monster, not a knife in the dark, but the gentle, voluntary dissolution of the self. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sight, but it was too late. The hue was already inside my head. So I fought it there. I didn't try to remember all the colors of the spectrum, that was a battle I was losing. I focused on one. One, single, mundane, imperfect color. The specific, faded brown of the worn leather patch on my father's old denim jacket. I pictured it with all my training, all my obsessive focus. It wasn't a pure color. It was complex, flawed. Scratched with lighter tans, stained darker in places with oil, faded by 1,000 washings. It was a color that told a story. It was the color of history, of memory, of a tangible, messy, human life. It was everything the hue was not. I clung to that specific, imperfect shade of brown like a man clinging to a piece of driftwood in a maelstrom. I built a fortress around it in my mind. The humming of the room tried to wash it away, to smooth it out into a perfect, simple tone, but the flaws, the history, the story in the color gave me purchase. The spell broke. The seductive peace receded, replaced by a raw, animal terror. I didn't attack Anya. I didn't try to disrupt the circle. I just turned and ran. I fled back through the darkened halls of the museum, the humming of the acolytes chasing me. As I burst out the service door and into the night, I risked a single glance back at the prismatic gallery's high windows. They were no longer glowing with a soft light. They were blazing, like the heart of a newborn star. For a gut-wrenching second, the facade of the building seemed to go transparent, and I saw what they were focusing on. It wasn't another place. It was not a landscape of alien trees and strange skies. It was a glimpse into the source reality. An infinite, non-Euclidean space made not of matter or energy as I knew them, but of pure, crystalline, self-aware geometry. And it was composed entirely of the hue. I saw things moving within it. Beings of pure information, of living color. Their forms shifting like calamitous, beautiful thoughts. It was not an invasion in the way I understood it. We weren't being conquered. Our reality was simply a canvas, and a new masterpiece was being painted over us. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, not stopping until I was back in the North End, back in my blacked-out apartment. I collapsed on the floor, shaking, the image of that impossible dimension burned onto the inside of my eyelids. That was weeks ago. I don't leave anymore. The world outside has changed. The hum is constant now, a low thrum that vibrates through the city's bones. The last news broadcast I watched showed a reporter with glowing irises, speaking in a calm monotone about the harmonious new civic beautification projects. The world hasn't ended in fire or screams, but in a quiet, beatific sigh. I have become a creature of gray. I've thrown out everything with a strong color. My diet is crackers, water, and canned potatoes. I sketch with charcoal on newsprint. I am the last static, a ghost haunting my own tomb. My superpower nobody wanted has become my curse, the very thing that keeps me from the peace that has consumed everyone else. I am immune to heaven, and therefore I live in hell. This morning, there was a knock at the door. I ignored it. A few minutes later, I heard the slide of a package being pushed under the door. It was a small, flat box, wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of white tissue paper, was a single object. A swatch of fabric, about the size of my hand. It was woven from a single, beautiful, impossible thread. The hue. It lay there in the dim, gray light of my apartment, not reflecting the light but emitting its own soft, internal luminescence. It pulsed gently, a silent, rhythmic beat. With it was a small, handwritten card. The handwriting was my sister Chloe's. Thinking of you. Knew you'd love this. It's everyone's favorite color now. I stared at the swatch. It was an invitation. A final, personal appeal. A reminder that my isolation was complete. Everyone I had ever known was on the other side now, waiting for me in the warm, quiet light. I picked it up. The fabric was impossibly soft. Holding it, the roaring static in my head began to quiet. The fear, the loneliness, the constant struggle, they began to feel very, very tired. The color was so simple. So peaceful. So beautiful. I sat there, in my gray room, holding the end of the world in my hand. And for the first time, I didn't want to throw it away. I just wanted to look. The quiet contagion, the pause between words. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. Chapter 1. The word that broke the world, for me, was albatross. Not the word itself, but the void that surrounded it. I was standing at the front of my Year 12 English class at Edenvale College, Auckland's sunlight streaming through the high windows, illuminating the motes of dust dancing in the air. The room smelled of chalk dust, cheap deodorant, and the faint, sweet scent of rain on hot pavement from a passing morning shower. It was a smell I knew better than my own aftershave. So, when the ancient mariner is forced to wear the albatross around his neck, I said, gesturing with a piece of chalk, it's not just a dead bird. It's a metaphor. A symbol of his guilt. The albatross is the burden of his sin made tangible. It's a classic literary device, a weight he has to carry. Does that make sense? 30 pairs of eyes stared back at me. Not with boredom, not with defiance, but with a profound, glassy emptiness. This was different from the usual teenage apathy I was so accustomed to navigating. This was a complete lack of connection, as if I'd just started speaking in fluent Serbo-Croatian. An albatross around your neck, I prompted, scanning their faces. It's a common idiom. You must have heard it. A girl in the front row, Melee, who was usually sharp and engaged, just blinked slowly. An albatross is a bird, sir. Yes, Melee, but it represents something else. A burden. A curse. Another student, Liam O'Connell, no relation, just an unfortunate coincidence that forced me to use his surname, furrowed his brow. But why not just say, burden? The question was so artless, so devoid of any grasp of subtext, that it momentarily stunned me. Because poetry, Liam, language, isn't just about efficient data transfer. It's about feeling, imagery, tradition. I trailed off. They were lost. Utterly adrift on a sea of literalism. I tried a different tack. Okay, forget the albatross. How about kicking the bucket? Blank stares. Biting the bullet? Nothing. A few of them exchanged confused glances, as if I were the one making no sense. All right, I said, forcing a smile that felt brittle. Let's move on to stanza 4. I turned back to the whiteboard, the chalk feeling slippery in my suddenly damp palm. A cold knot was tightening in my stomach. It wasn't the first time. For the past month, it had felt like teaching was becoming an exercise in archaeology, trying to excavate meanings from words that had become fossilized and inert for my students. Shared cultural shorthand was evaporating. History was next. A discussion on the Gallipoli campaign a week prior had been met with the same vacant confusion, as if it were a fictional event from a fantasy novel. My colleague, Sarah Jenkins, head of the history department, had laughed it off in the staff room. They're kids, Liam. Their brains are 80% TikTok and 20% hormones. You're lucky they know who the current prime minister is. She took a sip of her tea, her eyes crinkling. She'll be right. But it didn't feel right. It felt like a fraying, a slow unwinding of the threads that held our shared understanding together. That afternoon, the fraying happened right in front of me. Sarah and I were discussing the parent-teacher evening schedule in her office, a cozy mess of books and historical maps. So, I was thinking if we put the year 13s in the main hall and the year 12s in the... She stopped. Her mouth remained slightly open, the word hovering, unsaid. Her eyes, usually so sharp and intelligent, went distant. It wasn't the look of someone searching for a word. It was the look of a machine that had just been unplugged. She stared past my shoulder at a faded map of the Western Front, her posture frozen. 1 second. 2. 3. The silence was absolute. The ticking of the clock on her wall seemed to grow loud enough to shake the room. I opened my mouth to ask if she was okay, but before I could, she blinked, her focus snapping back to me with an audible intake of breath. The gymnasium, she finished, as if no time had passed at all. She smiled, completely unfazed. That way we can manage the flow of people better. What do you think? My heart was hammering against my ribs. Sarah, are you all right? You just paused. She tilted her head, her smile faltering into confusion. Paused? What are you talking about? I was just suggesting we use the gym. Her tone was so genuinely perplexed it made me question my own perception. Had I imagined it? A microsleep? Was I that stressed? No, you stopped talking. For a few seconds. Mid-sentence. Liam, I think the end of term is getting to you, she said, her voice softening with concern. I'm fine. Just a bit swamped. Now, about the welcome desk. I let it go. I had to. Arguing would have made me sound unhinged. But as I walked back to my own classroom, the unsettling stillness of her gaze was burned into my mind. It wasn't a human pause. It was a cessation. A buffering error in the code of conversation. And for the first time, a sliver of genuine fear, cold and sharp, pierced the veil of my everyday anxieties. Chapter 2. My mother lived in a world of fractured memories. Dementia had been a slow, cruel thief, stealing her past piece by piece, leaving behind a confusing collage of moments she could no longer arrange in chronological order. I visited her every Wednesday and Sunday at the rest home in Remuera, a place that smelled of lavender air freshener and institutional despair. Perhaps that was why I was so sensitive to the glitches in the world outside. I was already living part-time in a reality where shared context had collapsed. When my mother called me by my father's name or asked when we were going on the family holiday to Rotorua we'd taken in 1998, I would gently correct her, anchoring her back to the present. It was my job to maintain the integrity of her world, even as it crumbled from within. That Sunday, the crumbling seemed to have spread beyond the walls of her room. I was sitting by her bed, holding her frail, blue-veined hand, telling her about my week. The pohutukua trees are starting to flower along the waterfront, I said. It's beautiful. All that crimson against the gray sea. She smiled, a distant, sweet expression. Your father loved she paused. Her grip on my hand tightened slightly. Her blue eyes unfocused, staring at the wall just as Sarah's had. The same blankness. The same eerie stillness. My breath caught in my throat. I had seen her struggle for words 1,000 times. This was not that. This was an absence. A null state. The pause stretched. 5 seconds. 6. The lavender scent in the room felt cloying, suffocating. A nurse walked past the open door, humming softly, oblivious. Then, just as abruptly, Mum blinked and her focus returned. The summer, she finished, her voice a little weaker. She looked down at our joined hands. He always said it meant Christmas was coming. She seemed tired, but unaware that anything unusual had happened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and ask what had happened in that silence, where she had gone. But I couldn't. It would be a cruelty. Instead, I just squeezed her hand. Yeah, Mum. He did. The drive home was a blur of mounting paranoia. The southern motorway was its usual snarl of weekend traffic. I was crawling past the Bombay Hills turnoff when I saw it again. The driver of the Toyota Aqua in the lane next to me was talking to his passenger. I saw his mouth moving, his hands gesturing. Then, he stopped. Mid-gesture. His head was turned towards the passenger, but his eyes were vacant, staring straight ahead through his own windscreen. A beat later, the passenger, a woman in her 40s, also froze, her head mid-nod. They were perfectly still, a tableau vivant in the sluggish river of traffic. I stared, mesmerized and horrified. A car horn blared behind me. I jolted forward, my eyes flicking back to the Aqua. The driver and passenger were now laughing, resuming their conversation as if the world hadn't stopped for them. It wasn't me. It couldn't be. Not my mother, Sarah, and 2 complete strangers. This was real. That night, I started a log. I bought a simple, black moleskine notebook and a fine-tipped pen. I sat at my dining table, the lights of Auckland spread out below my apartment window on Union Street, the sky tower a silent, watchful needle of light. I wrote down everything. Date, October 23rd. Incidents of semantic disruption and conversational lags. 1. Subject, Year 12 English class. Anomaly, inability to comprehend idiomatic language, albatross, kick the bucket, etc. General confusion regarding abstract concepts. 2. Subject, Sarah Jenkins. Anomaly, conversational pause. Approximate, 3 to 4 seconds. Subject unaware. Mid-sentence cessation. Location, SH's office. 3. Subject, mother, Helen. Anomaly, conversational pause. Approximate, 6 seconds. Subject unaware. Location, Meadowbank Rest Home. Note, must differentiate from standard dementia-related memory loss. This felt different. Cleaner. More absolute. 4. Subjects, unidentified male and female. Anomaly, simultaneous conversational pause. Approximate, 2 to 3 seconds. Location, Southern Motorway. I stared at the list. It looked like the ravings of a madman. Stress. Lack of sleep. My mother's illness projecting itself onto the world around me. I could rationalize each one individually. Melee and Liam were just kids. Sarah was overworked. My mother was ill. The couple in the car. A trick of the light, a moment of inattention on my part. But together, they formed a pattern. A quiet, creeping pattern of cognitive failure. Or was it my failure? Was I the one glitching, misperceiving the flow of time, inventing these silent gaps? The thought was terrifying. It was the difference between being a witness and being a symptom. I closed the notebook, my hand trembling slightly. Outside, the city hummed its endless, electric lullaby. It had always been a comforting sound. Tonight, it sounded like the static between stations, the sound of a signal that was slowly being lost. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. Chapter 3. The next 2 weeks were a slow descent into hypervigilance. The world became a field of data points for my secret obsession. I saw the pause everywhere. The barista at my local cafe on High Street, leaving the word milk hanging in the air for 4 seconds before asking if I wanted trim or whole. A newsreader on TV, her face smooth and professional, freezing for a breath before continuing her report on council water rates. 2 construction workers outside my building, both stopping mid-shout, tools held aloft, before resuming their argument. Each time, I surreptitiously timed it on my phone's stopwatch and logged it in my Moleskine. The pauses varied in length, from a brief 2-second hitch to an unnerving 7-second void. There was no discernible pattern in who it affected or when. It was random. It was everywhere. My teaching suffered. I found myself watching my students' faces not for comprehension, but for the telltale sign of vacancy. I avoided idioms and metaphors, sticking to the most literal, bone-dry explanations of texts. My classroom, once a vibrant space of linguistic exploration, became a sterile laboratory. The students didn't seem to notice the difference. In fact, they seemed to prefer it. My clear, efficient, artless instruction earned me nods of understanding I hadn't seen in months. They were learning the what, but the why and the how were becoming irrelevant, unnecessary concepts. The isolation was the worst part. The anomaly had a perfect self-defense mechanism, it was invisible to those it affected. To bring it up was to brand yourself as strange, stressed, or worse. I tried with Sarah again, a week after the first incident. We were in the staff room, the air thick with the smell of burnt toast and instant coffee. "You know, I saw the strangest thing on the news last night," I began, trying for a casual tone. "The anchor, the one who does the 6 p.m. broadcast." She just stopped. For a few seconds. Right in the middle of a sentence. Sarah glanced up from marking a stack of essays, her pen hovering. Probably a technical glitch. Teleprompter froze. But she didn't look flustered. When she started again, it was seamless. "Well, she's a professional, isn't she?" Sarah said, already turning back to her work, her tone implying the conversation was over. They're trained for that. Denial. Rationalization. The walls were closing in. I was the boy crying wolf, but the wolf was a ghost that only I could see. My friends started treating me with a gentle, cautious distance. I'd be out for a drink with my mate Rob, and he'd ask how I was doing. I'm fine, but I keep noticing this thing, I'd say, lowering my voice. People are pausing when they talk. Like they're buffering. Rob would laugh, a deep, booming sound that felt entirely too loud. Mate, you need a holiday. You've been spending too much time with teenagers and your mum. It's rubbing off on you. He'd clap me on the shoulder, but his eyes would hold a flicker of worry. Liam's losing it. I retreated further into my logbook. It was my only confidant, the only place I could be honest without judgment. The pages began to fill with frantic script, timings, locations, and increasingly desperate theories. Theory A, environmental toxin. Some kind of airborne agent. Unlikely. It's too specific in its effect. Doesn't cause physical symptoms, only these cognitive hiccups. Theory B, technological interference. A byproduct of 5G. Wi-Fi signals. Some new broadcast frequency we're not aware of. It feels more plausible. The buffering analogy is too apt. Theory C, mass psychological phenomenon. A shared delusion. A stress response to the modern world. But why am I immune? Or am I the only one with the delusion? This last question haunted my nights. I'd lie awake, listening to the hum of the city, wondering if the problem was not with the world, but with the filter through which I was perceiving it. Maybe this was how madness began, not with a bang, but with a quiet, creeping sense of disconnection from everyone else. My only solace was my research. I spent hours online, navigating the murky waters of conspiracy forums and obscure academic journals. Most of it was useless noise about chemtrails and lizard people. But late one night, buried deep in a message board for Fortean phenomena and cognitive anomalies, I found it. It was a post from 3 months ago, authored by a user named Cassandra_NZ. Subject, semantic bleed and temporal lags in conversation. Has anyone else noticed this? Over the past year, I have observed a marked increase in what I can only describe as conversational lags. Individuals will pause mid-sentence for a period of 2 to 8 seconds, before resuming with no memory of the event. This is often accompanied by a demonstrable decline in the comprehension and use of abstract language, metaphor, and historical context. The effect is subtle but widespread. I have been logging incidents in the Auckland CBD and North Shore areas. I believe we are witnessing a form of semantic erosion on a societal scale. If you have observed this phenomenon, please respond. I am attempting to map its frequency and duration. My hands were shaking. I read the post again, and then a third time. Semantic erosion. The phrase was perfect. It was exactly what I had been witnessing. Someone else saw it. Someone else had given it a name. I wasn't alone. I clicked on the user profile. Cassandra_NZ. The account was sparse, with only this one post and a handful of comments on other threads about historical linguistics and signal processing. An email address was listed in the bio. Without a second's hesitation, I opened a new message and began to type. Subject, I see it too. Chapter 4. The reply came 2 days later. It was brief and to the point. Mr. Callan. Thank you for your message. Your observations align with my own. I would be interested to compare our data. I am not one for online correspondence, it lacks nuance. Would you be amenable to meeting in person? Regards. Ilara Vance. P.S. Cassandra was a prophetess cursed by the gods so that her true prophecies would never be believed. I have found it an increasingly apt moniker. The email included an address in Devonport. An appointment was set for the following Saturday. For the first time in weeks, a sliver of hope cut through the fog of my paranoia. Ilara Vance. Even her name sounded solid, academic, real. The ferry ride across the Waitemata harbor felt like a journey to another country. I stood on the deck, the wind whipping at my jacket, and watched the glass and steel towers of the CBD recede. The harbor was dotted with sailboats, their white sails bright against the choppy, blue-green water. It was a perfect Auckland day, the kind of day that usually filled me with a sense of buoyant optimism. Today, it just felt like a beautiful facade, a painted backdrop for the silent play unfolding within its inhabitants. Devonport, with its charming Victorian villas and sleepy village atmosphere, felt a world away from the city's hum. Ilara Vance lived in a small, grey-painted cottage set back from the road, half hidden by a riotous garden of native flaxes and ferns. A woman in her late 60s or early 70s answered the door. She was tall and slender, with a cascade of wiry gray hair pulled back in a loose clip and eyes the color of a stormy sea. They were the most intensely alive eyes I had ever seen, sharp and analytical. She wore a simple black merino wool jumper and dark trousers. "Mr. Callan," she said, her voice a low, precise alto. "Ilara Vance. Please, come in." Her house was a sanctuary of the written word. Books overflowed from shelves that lined every wall, from floor to ceiling. They were stacked on tables, chairs, and even in neat piles on the floor. The air smelled of old paper, leather bindings, and brewed coffee. It was the smell of a life dedicated to knowledge. "Coffee?" she asked, gesturing towards a kitchen barely visible behind a rampart of paperbacks. "Please," I said, my nervousness easing in the presence of this reassuringly tangible reality. We sat at a small wooden table cleared of its bibliographic burden. I pulled out my Moleskine. She produced a series of thick, leather-bound ledgers. For the next hour, we spoke, our words tumbling out in a rush of shared relief. We were two castaways who had finally found another survivor on the same deserted island. "It started for me about 18 months ago," she said, her gaze fixed on me. "I was a linguistics professor at the University of Auckland. I began noticing it in my postgrad students. Their ability to engage with theoretical semiotics was degrading. They could recite definitions, but they couldn't synthesize. They couldn't make the conceptual leaps. Then came the pauses. They think I'm going mad," I confessed, the words tasting of salt and relief. "My colleagues, my friends. They just rationalize it away." "Of course, they do," Ilara said with a wry, humorless smile. "The phenomenon is self-insulating. How can you describe a color to a man who is slowly going blind? He will simply think your imagination is running away with you." She flipped open one of her ledgers. It was filled with notations even more meticulous than my own. Dates, times, durations, locations, and even barometric pressure and solar flare activity. She had cross-referenced everything. "I have a theory," she said, tapping a long, elegant finger on a complex chart. "What we are seeing is not a biological plague or a simple psychological tick. I believe it is a signal." "A signal? Like from a radio tower?" "In a manner of speaking. But not one meant for our technology. It's a signal aimed at the human mind. Specifically, at the complex, chaotic, and frankly inefficient parts of our cognition. Metaphor, irony, abstract thought, recursive memory, these are messy processes. They are computationally expensive. This signal, whatever its source, appears to be streamlining them." "Streamlining them?" "Ilara, it's deleting them." "Is there a difference?" she asked, her stormy eyes challenging me. "Think of it as a software update for the human wetware. One that deletes legacy features to improve core performance. People become more literal, more efficient. But they lose the poetry of thought. The pauses," she leaned forward, her voice dropping, "are the moments the system is writing the new code. Buffering, as you so aptly put it. A cold dread, far deeper than any I had felt before, settled over me. Her theory was insane. It was the stuff of bad science fiction. And yet, it fit the facts more perfectly than anything I could devise. But what is sending the signal? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked out the window, towards the city skyline just visible through the trees. The sky tower stood sentinel, its needle piercing the clouds. That, Mr. Callan, she said, is the billion-dollar question. But I have noticed something else. Something that frightens me more than the pauses themselves. She turned a page in her ledger. It was a timeline, with dozens of data points marked on it. They're getting closer together, she said. The pauses. The intervals between them are shortening. But more than that, she drew a series of circles on the page, connecting different data points. They are synchronizing. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? Last Tuesday. At 11:42 a.m. I recorded a 5.7-second pause in a woman at the Devonport Library. At the same time, I had a feed from a traffic cam at the Victoria Park intersection running. I reviewed the footage. 3 pedestrians and a cyclist. They all paused. For exactly 5.7 seconds. At exactly 11:42 a.m. She looked at me, her face grim. It's organizing itself, Liam. It's moving from a scattered, random phenomenon into a coherent, synchronized event. And I have no idea what happens when an entire city pauses at once. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. Chapter 5. Our alliance became the new center of my universe. Twice a week. I would take the ferry to Devonport, my Moleskine filled with new observations. Elara and I would sit in her fortress of books, comparing notes, trying to pull a coherent thread from the chaos. She was the strategist, the academic mind, I was the frontline soldier, gathering intelligence from the mundane battlefields of the classroom and the supermarket. The secondary mystery that had been nagging at me, the loss of historical context, became a key focus for Elara. She theorized that the signal, as we now called it, was targeting not just abstract thought, but any information that required a layered, nonlinear understanding of time. History wasn't just a list of dates, it was a web of cause and effect, of narrative and interpretation. It was inefficient. It's pruning the branches to strengthen the trunk, she explained one afternoon, sketching a diagram of a tree on a napkin. The trunk is the immediate present. The now. Anything that complicates that, past regrets, future anxieties, historical parallels, is being trimmed away. People aren't just losing the memory of Gallipoli, they're losing the very concept of a tragic, defining past. The world was getting flatter, less textured. Conversations became more direct, more transactional. The gentle art of Kiwi self-deprecation, the dry wit, the reliance on understatement, it was all fading, being replaced by a bland, earnest literalism. People were becoming easier to understand, but harder to connect with. They were like beautifully rendered but non-playable characters in a video game. The stakes escalated in a terrifyingly personal way. I got a call from my mother's rest home. She'd had a fall. I rushed over, my mind racing with 1,000 fears. I found her in her room, sitting in a chair with a large bruise forming on her temple and a cut on her arm that the nurse was gently dressing. What happened? I asked the nurse, a kind young woman named Priya. Priya looked distressed. It was the strangest thing, Mr. Callan. Your mother was walking to the bathroom. I was right behind her. And then we both just stopped. My heart seized. You stopped? Yes. For a few seconds. I don't know why. It was like I forgot what I was doing. When I came to, Helen was already on the floor. She must have paused too, and lost her balance. The signal was no longer just a passive cognitive event. It now had direct, physical consequences. It was causing harm. A fall for an elderly woman today. What about a surgeon tomorrow? A pilot? An air traffic controller? I looked at my mother. She was staring at her hands, a placid, untroubled expression on her face. She hadn't been frightened by the fall. She seemed to have already forgotten it, the trauma pruned away by the very thing that had caused it. That night, Elara and I stayed up late, fueled by black coffee and sheer terror. We had to find the source. We had dismissed the idea of a single broadcast point like the Sky Tower. The effect was too widespread, too uniform. It's not a broadcast from one place, Elara murmured, pacing her small living room. It's a resonance. A field. Something has been introduced into our environment that allows this signal to propagate, using the existing infrastructure as a carrier wave. What infrastructure? All of it, she said, stopping to look at me, her eyes wide. The power grid. The cellular networks. The Wi-Fi routers in every home and cafe. It's not coming from them. It's passing through them. The entire city is a giant antenna, and we are the receivers. The idea was suffocating. We were swimming in it. Breathing it. There was no escape. But we found a clue. A fragile, terrifying clue. While cross-referencing my logbook with Elara's data on a map of Auckland, we noticed a faint correlation. The pauses seemed marginally longer, by milliseconds, but consistently so, in areas of older infrastructure. Places with original copper wiring, old substations, pre-digital telephone exchanges. It's like the signal gets snagged on the older tech, I theorized. It has to work harder to pass through, creating a slightly longer lag. Or, Elara countered, her face pale, the older, more analog systems are more compatible with it. They amplify it in a way the clean, digital ones don't. There was one place on the map where the anomaly was most pronounced. A small, almost forgotten electrical substation in the industrial area of Penrose, an old brick building from the 1950s, surrounded by modern warehouses and factories. According to Elara's charts, the longest, most consistent pauses had been logged within a kilometer radius of that building. It wasn't a source. But it might be an amplifier. A focal point. A place where the signal was strongest, where we might be able to learn something about its nature. We decided to go. It felt like a foolish, desperate plan, two civilians marching into the heart of an invisible hurricane. But the alternative, to sit and wait for the pauses to lengthen, to coalesce into one final, permanent silence, was unthinkable. We found a temporary ally, or so we thought. I had a cousin, Ben, who worked for one of the major power companies. He was a linesman, a practical, no-nonsense guy. I approached him carefully, framing our interest in the Penrose substation as a historical curiosity for Elara's research. I asked if he could get us access, or at least provide schematics for the old building. Ben was friendly, but dismissive. That old brick thing. Mate, it's mostly decommissioned. Just a few legacy trunk lines running through it. Nothing interesting there. He looked at me, a familiar concerned expression dawning in his eyes. You alright, Liam? You seem a bit intense lately. Then, he paused. It was the longest one I had ever witnessed in person. A full 10 seconds. His friendly face went slack, his eyes glazed over, staring into the middle distance. He stood perfectly still in his living room, a half-empty bottle of beer held loosely in his hand. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. When he came back, he blinked, took a swig of his beer, and said, "But yeah, I'll see if I can dig up the plans for you." No worries. He had no memory of the chasm of silence that had just opened up in the middle of his sentence. He was our only potential ally, and he was as deeply infected as everyone else. Elara and I were on our own. Chapter 6. We went to the Penrose substation on a Thursday night. The sky was overcast, the air thick with the promise of rain. The industrial zone was a ghost town after dark, a maze of silent warehouses and cavernous lots, lit by the sickly orange glow of sodium streetlights. The substation was exactly as Ben had described it, a relic. A single-story brick building, grimy with decades of pollution, surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A large sign on the gate read, "Danger, high voltage." "This feels insane," I whispered, the sound swallowed by the vast, empty space. "Insanity is relative," Elara replied, her voice steady. She pulled a pair of bolt cutters from her large canvas bag. "When the world goes mad, the sane man is the one who adapts his methods." I had never seen her look more determined, or more alive. The professor had shed her academic skin and become a field operative. While she worked on the padlock, I kept watch, my nerves screaming. Every distant sound, the rumble of a truck on the motorway, the clatter of loose metal in the wind, felt like an approaching threat. The lock gave way with a dull snap. We slipped through the gate, into the shadow of the brick building. The air inside the fence felt different. It was heavy, humming with a low, subaudible frequency that I felt more in my bones than heard with my ears. It was the sound of the signal, raw and unfiltered. The main door was solid steel, but a small maintenance hatch on the side was secured with a much simpler lock. Elara's skills were surprisingly versatile, it took her less than a minute to pick it. We crept inside, our torch beams cutting through the absolute darkness. The interior was a cathedral of obsolete technology. Huge, oil-filled transformers stood like silent, brooding gods, covered in a thick layer of dust. Bakelite dials and analog gauges lined the walls, their needles all resting at zero. Thick bundles of cables, as thick as my arm, snaked across the floor and up into the ceiling. The humming was stronger in here, a physical pressure against my eardrums. "It's not producing power," Elara murmured, running her hand over a cold metal casing. "It's just, resonating. Like a giant tuning fork." We moved deeper into the building, into the main control room. Here, a vast switchboard covered one wall, a mosaic of levers, dials, and cracked glass meters. In the center of the room, however, was something that didn't belong. It was a small, modern server rack, humming quietly, its blue and green LEDs blinking in the darkness. It was wired directly into the old infrastructure, piggybacking on the ancient copper lines. "This is it," I breathed. "This is the amplifier." Elara approached it cautiously, her face a mask of intense concentration. "This hardware is standard. Off the shelf. But the way it's integrated, it's a parasite, leeching onto the nervous system of the old grid." She pointed her torch at a small, sealed unit at the top of the rack. It was smooth, black, and had no discernible markings or ports. "That's the core. The part that's interfacing with the signal." A wave of dizziness washed over me. The humming in my head intensified, resolving itself into a phantom chorus of whispers, just at the edge of hearing. I stumbled, putting a hand out to steady myself against the control panel. "Liam." Elara's voice sounded distant. My fingers brushed against a large, red-handled lever on the main board. A faded, stenciled label beneath it read, "Main grid disconnect." It was an emergency shut-off. A circuit breaker for the entire station. "Elara," I said, my voice thick. "If we pull this, what happens? We might sever the connection." "At least for this node," she said, her eyes fixed on the black box. "Or we might cause a feedback loop that fries every electrical system in a 10-kilometer radius. Or, nothing at all." The whispers in my head grew louder. They weren't words, but pure, raw concepts. Efficiency. Clarity. Stillness. Unity. The signal wasn't just deleting things, it was offering a replacement. A promise of peace. A world without the messy, painful friction of misunderstanding and regret. A world of serene, silent agreement. For a terrifying second, it sounded beautiful. "We have to try," I said, gripping the lever. It was cold and heavy. Before I could pull it, the world went silent. It wasn't the usual pause. This was absolute. The hum of the server rack died. The distant rumble of the city ceased. Even the sound of my own frantic breathing vanished. My hand was frozen on the lever. Elara was motionless beside me, her eyes wide, locked on the black box. This was it. The synchronized event she had predicted. The great pause. My mind, however, was still my own. I was trapped inside a frozen moment, but I was still me. The whispers intensified, no longer a suggestion but a command. Join. Cease. Be one. I could feel it pressing in, trying to find the cracks in my consciousness, the little entry points of fear and doubt. I fought back. I clung to the most inefficient, irrational, beautifully complex things I could think of. The rhyme scheme of a Yeats poem. The smell of my mother's baking from a childhood I could barely remember. The frustrating, illogical, heartbreaking love I still felt for her, even in her decline. I flooded my mind with the very chaos the signal was trying to erase. The pressure was immense, a physical force trying to flatten the landscape of my soul. I squeezed my eyes shut, my knuckles white on the lever. And then I saw it. Not with my eyes, but in my mind. A flash of horrifying understanding. The signal wasn't an attack. It was a call. A broadcast from something ancient and vast, something that perceived our chaotic, individual consciousnesses as a painful, screaming static. It wasn't trying to destroy us. It was trying to soothe us. To tune us to its own, silent, eternal frequency. It was an act of terrible, misguided compassion. An extinction event born of pity. The pressure receded. The sound of the world rushed back in, the hum of the server, my own gasping breath. The pause was over. It had lasted maybe a minute, but it felt like an eternity. I looked at Elara. She was staring at the black box, but her sharp, analytical gaze was gone. In its place was a look of placid, beatific calm. Elara? I whispered. She turned to me slowly, a gentle smile on her lips. It's so quiet now, she said, her voice soft and melodic. All the noise is gone. I can finally think. And then she paused. Her eyes went distant. The smile remained, serene and empty. 10 seconds passed. When she returned, she looked at me with a faint, pitying confusion, as if seeing a relic from a noisy, forgotten age. She had been assimilated. My ally was gone. I was alone, in the heart of the machine, holding a lever that no longer mattered. Disconnecting the amplifier now would be like trying to cure a disease after the patient had already died and been reborn as something else. I let my hand fall away from the switch. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. Chapter 7. I stumbled out of the substation into the damp Auckland night. The orange streetlights seemed brighter, the air cleaner. The world looked the same, but it was fundamentally altered. I had lost. We had all lost. Or we had won, and I was the only one who hadn't understood the prize. The drive back across the city was surreal. The traffic flowed more smoothly. There were no angry horns, no aggressive lane changes. Drivers moved with a calm, deliberate purpose. At intersections, people waited patiently, their faces serene. The chaotic, competitive ballet of city driving had been replaced by a graceful, synchronized procession. In the days that followed, the change solidified. The pause was no longer a glitch, it was a feature. It was integrated into the rhythm of life. People would stop mid-sentence in a conversation, and their listener would simply wait, patiently, for them to resume. It was treated with the same mundane acceptance as a sneeze or a cough. It was a moment of communion, a brief reconnection to the silent, underlying hum. The world became quieter. Arguments ceased. Laughter was softer, less boisterous. Art, music, poetry, they didn't vanish, but they changed. They became simpler, more literal. The jagged edges of human emotion were sanded down, leaving a smooth, polished surface. Society hadn't collapsed. In many ways, it had become more efficient, more peaceful. It had just ceased to be truly human. I tried to continue teaching. I stood in front of my class, trying to explain the tragic irony in Othello. They listened with polite, placid attention. "Do you understand?" I asked, my voice raw with desperation. He was destroyed by a lie because he couldn't understand the complexity of love and jealousy. Mele, my once bright student, raised her hand. "Sir," she said, her voice clear and calm. It would have been more efficient if he had just asked his wife for clarification. She paused then, a 5-second gap of serene stillness, before adding, "His emotional response was illogical." The other students nodded in silent agreement. I resigned the next day. I couldn't be a custodian of a language no one spoke anymore. I saw Elara one last time. I took the ferry to Devonport, a foolish pilgrimage. She was in her garden, trimming a rose bush with precise, unhurried movements. She saw me and smiled her new, empty smile. "Liam," she said. "It is a pleasant day." "Elara," I pleaded. "Don't you remember? The signal? What we were fighting for?" She tilted her head, a flicker of something, not confusion, but a kind of academic curiosity, in her eyes. "Fighting?" she said. "There is no need to fight. Everything is resolved." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the harbor. When she returned, she looked at my face, at the pain and anguish I knew must be written there. "You are still so full of noise," she observed, not with judgment, but with a gentle, clinical pity. "You should let it go. It is so much more peaceful when you just listen." I left without another word. I am the ghost now. The glitch in the new, flawless system. I walked the streets of my city, a city of serene, smiling strangers. I am a relic, a museum of one, housing the obsolete artifacts of irony, metaphor, historical grief, and irrational love. The pauses happen around me constantly. A silent, rhythmic pulse binding everyone together in a web of placid consensus. I am the only one left on the outside, a discordant note in their perfect, silent harmony. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my apartment and listen to the hum of the city. I can almost hear the signal, the great, silent, eternal broadcast. It still whispers its promises of peace and unity. It's a tempting offer. An end to the loneliness. An end to the struggle. To fight it, I cling to the old words. I read poetry aloud to my empty room, the complex, messy, inefficient verses of Yeats and Coleridge and Baxter. I fill the silence with the beautiful, chaotic noise of a world that no longer exists. I hold on to the memory of my mother's rambling stories, the frustration of Sarah's denial, the fiery intelligence in Elara's eyes before the storm passed and the calm set in. I cherish the static. I am the keeper of the pause between words, not the new, empty pause, but the old one. The one filled with hesitation, with searching, with the frantic, beautiful, human struggle to find the right words, even if we never truly can. It's a lonely vigil, but it's the only one I have left. I am the albatross, a living monument to a forgotten sin, a burden of memory in a world that has chosen to forget. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The city is a map etched onto the back of my mind. Not the paper kind, folded into awkward squares, or the cold blue line on a phone screen. My map is made of muscle memory and sensory data, the specific jarring rattle of my bike over the cobbles of the custard factory's courtyard in Digbeth, the way the wind funnels down Colmore Row, the smell of malt from the brewery that hangs over Aston on a damp morning. I'm Leo. For 6 years, my world has been the A to Z of Birmingham, delivered one padded envelope and cardboard box at a time. I'm a bicycle courier, and my encyclopedic knowledge of this city isn't just a skill, it's my identity. I know the shortcuts, the ginnels, the one-way systems that aren't, if you're brave enough. The city is a living thing, and I know its pulse. Or I thought I did. The first tremor in my reality was so slight I dismissed it as a brain fart, a lapse in concentration after a long day. It was a Tuesday. A document wallet for a solicitor's office in the Jewelry Quarter, a classic run. From the dispatch office near New Street, it's a straight shot up, a weave through St. Paul's Square, and you're there. 10 minutes, tops. I pushed off, the familiar whir of my chain a comforting rhythm beneath me. I took the turn onto Great Charles Street Queensway, my legs pumping, my mind already on the next job. But the turn for Lionel Street, the one I'd taken 1,000 times, felt long. The road seemed to stretch, the familiar sandstone of the museum on my left holding on for a few seconds too long. When I finally took the turn, I wasn't looking at the familiar clock tower. I was on a street of modern, anonymous buildings, all grey cladding and tinted glass. I skidded to a halt, 1 foot on the pavement, confused. A cold prickle of annoyance. I must have zoned out and missed the turn. I swore under my breath, pulled out my phone. The GPS pulsed patiently on Lionel Street, exactly where I should have been. But the street I was on wasn't on the map. I shook my head, chalking it up to a GPS glitch and my own fatigue. I backtracked, found the correct turning a block further down than I remembered, and made the delivery, 5 minutes late and stewing in my own inefficiency. The recipient, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Albright, signed for the package. "You're usually quicker, Leo," she said, not unkindly. "Bad traffic," I lied. "Whole city's a car park today." It was a flimsy excuse on a bike, but she just nodded and closed the door. 2 days later, it happened again. A package for a tech startup in Edgbaston. A simple route down the Bristol Road. I knew it like the back of my hand. I cycled past the university, the clock tower of Old Joe, a reliable landmark. But then the road seemed to curve. It was a subtle, gentle bend that shouldn't have been there. It felt like the city was shrugging its concrete shoulders. I found myself spat out onto a street I'd never seen before. It was lined with the same bland, grey-clad office blocks as the last time. It even had the same name on a small, unassuming sign, Argent Street. A sick feeling of déjà vu washed over me. I stopped, heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I pulled out my phone. The map showed my little blue dot sitting happily on the Bristol Road. According to the technology in my hand, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But the physical world disagreed. I looked up at the building in front of me. The address matched the one on my docket. The tech company's logo was stenciled on the glass door. I went in. A young man with a top knot and a t-shirt with code on it took the package. "Cheers, mate," he said. "We've been waiting for this." "Sorry for the delay," I said, my voice tight. I got a bit turned around. "I don't know this street." He gave me a blank look. "Argent Street? We've been here 2 years. You've delivered to us before." I stared at him. "No. I delivered to you on Priory Road. The old converted church." He just chuckled, a dismissive little sound. "Nah, mate. Always been here. Must be thinking of someone else." He turned away, already absorbed in the package. I walked out, the door hissing shut behind me. My mind was reeling. I had delivered to them at least 5 times. I remembered the squeaky floorboard in their old reception, the stained glass window they'd covered with a whiteboard. That memory was vivid, tactile. But his certainty was absolute. It was the calm, untroubled certainty of someone stating a fact as obvious as the sky being blue. I spent the rest of the day feeling like I was walking on a drum's skin, the world vibrating with a secret frequency I was only just beginning to hear. Every familiar route felt treacherous. I hugged the A38, watching landmarks like a nervous sailor watching a coastline. The city felt alien, its geometry subtly corrupted. That weekend, I met my mate Reese for a pint. Reese is an accountant, a man who lives in a world of reassuring numbers and fixed assets. He's my anchor to the normal world. We sat in our usual spot at the Old Crown in Digbeth, the timber beams low over our heads. "You look knackered," he said, taking a sip of his beer. "It's the job," I started, then decided to test the waters. "City's been weird lately." "Weird how?" "More roadworks." "No. It's like, the roads themselves. They're not right." I told him about the deliveries, about Argent Street. I tried to make it sound like a funny anecdote, a weird coincidence. But my anxiety must have bled through. He listened patiently, his brow furrowed. "Leo, you're doing 60, 70 miles a day sometimes. You're probably just burnt out," he said, his voice full of placid reason. "Your brain's on autopilot and you're taking wrong turns. And as for that bloke in the tech company, people are idiots. He was probably just winding you up." I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted it to be that simple. Stress. Fatigue. A series of bizarre coincidences. But I couldn't shake the feeling of the road bending beneath my wheels. I couldn't forget the utter, placid conviction in that man's eyes. The following week, the illusion of coincidence was shattered. Dispatch gave me 3 jobs back to back. 1. A box of print proofs to a design agency in Bourneville. 2. A legal document to a barrister's chambers near Snow Hill Station. 3. A replacement laptop for a homeworker in Moseley. 3 distinct parts of the city. 3 postcodes I could navigate in my sleep. For Bourneville, I set off south, aiming for the Pershore Road. The route is straightforward. But as I passed Edgbaston Cricket Ground, a familiar intersection seemed to fold in on itself. A road that should have led left now veered right in a smooth, seamless arc. Before I could even process the wrongness, I was there. Argent Street. The design agency was in a building identical to the others. A new plaque on the wall. The receptionist took the box without batting an eye. "You found our new office then," she said brightly. "When did you move?" I asked, my voice strained. She laughed. "Move? We've always been here." My blood ran cold. I didn't argue. I just got back on my bike, my hands shaking. For the Snow Hill job, I decided to be clever. I would hug the canals. The towpaths were a separate network, an older city superimposed on the new. Surely, they couldn't be changed. I cycled along the water, under the dark bridges, the smell of damp brickwork in the air. It felt safe, true. I emerged near the base of the BT Tower, firmly in the city center. I got onto the road, followed the signs for Snow Hill. 2 turns. That's all it took. 2 turns and the road morphed, the buildings shimmered in my peripheral vision, and the gray facade of Argent Street rose up to meet me. The barrister was waiting on the pavement, checking his watch. He acted as if it was the most natural thing in the world to have his chambers located here. Panic was beginning to set in, a frantic bird beating against my ribs. Moseley. I had to break the pattern. I ignored the direct route. I took a winding, deliberately illogical path through Spark Brook and Balsall Heath, a tour of side streets and back alleys I hadn't used in years. I felt like I was fighting the city, wrestling with its very fabric. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. I was defiant. I would get to Moseley. I turned onto a street that I knew, from memory, led directly to Moseley Village. And the world bent. It was like watching a ripple in a pond, but the pond was made of tarmac and brick. The terraced houses on my left seemed to stretch and blur, their warm brickwork dissolving into cool gray cladding. The corner shop on my right flattened into a tinted glass entrance. The gentle suburban incline became the dead flat pavement of Argent Street. And there was my delivery target, a woman in her garden, a small, sterile patch of astroturf in front of her gray-clad house. She waved as I approached. 3 deliveries. 3 different destinations. All roads led to one. I looked up and down the street. It was longer now, curving away into the distance, lined with dozens of identical, soulless buildings. People milled about, going in and out of offices, walking dogs on the pristine pavement. They all looked normal. But they were all here. They were all on a street that didn't exist, a street that was swallowing my city, one delivery at a time. The map in my head was no longer a guide. It was a testament to a world that was disappearing. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The city had become a labyrinth with only one exit, and that exit was the entrance to the same, single place. My first reaction wasn't fear, but a furious, stubborn denial. The problem wasn't the city, it was me. I wasn't sleeping enough. I was dehydrated. There had to be a rational explanation. I started a new ritual. Before my first job each morning, I'd sit with a physical A to Z map book, the pages worn and soft, and trace my planned routes with a finger. I'd photograph the page with my phone. Then, I'd record my journey using a GPS tracking app, one that drew my path as a red line on a satellite image. I needed proof. I needed data to fight the creeping madness. My logbook became my Bible and my tormentor. Entry 14, Job, Cadbury World to the Rep Theater. Route planned, A38 North. Actual route taken per GPS, A38, then a sharp, impossible right-angle turn through a block of buildings, terminating at Argent Street. Recipient, theater stage manager, claimed their workshop had always been on Argent St. said the commute was much easier now. Entry 19, Job, University of Birmingham to a publisher in the Jewellery Quarter. Deliberately tried to get lost in the city's one-way system. Let the city guide me. It felt like being carried by a slow, powerful current. Ended up on Argent Street. GPS track shows me cycling in a perfect, straight line from the university campus, through buildings, over canals, directly to my destination. As if the city simply redrew the path of least resistance. Entry 23, stayed on Argent Street for an hour after a delivery. Watched people. They don't interact much. They walk at a similar pace. They all seem faintly, placidly content. I noticed a low hum here. It's not traffic, not electricity. It's lower than that, a vibration you feel in your teeth. Tried to record it on my phone but the microphone picked up nothing. I tried to show my evidence to my dispatcher, a perpetually stressed man named Dave. I cornered him in the office, spreading my map, my logbook, and my phone screen across his cluttered desk. Look, Dave. Every single one of these was supposed to go somewhere else. But I end up here. Every time. The GPS shows the route is physically impossible. Dave squinted at the screen, then at me. He ran a hand over his bald head. Leo, the jobs are getting done, right? The clients are signing for them. As long as the delivery is made, I don't care if you get there by unicorn. The system says the address is Argent Street, so that's where you go. But the system is wrong. Yesterday, this address was in Solihull. I protested, my voice rising. System says Argent Street, he repeated, his eyes glazed with the mantra of the willfully ignorant. He turned back to his screen, dismissing me. The system had already updated. The old addresses were gone, overwritten. As far as Dave was concerned, there was no discrepancy. My isolation deepened. The other couriers were no help. Some looked at me with the same pity as Reese. Others were already part of it. I saw a rival company's rider, a lad I knew called Sal, locking his bike up on Argent Street. Sal! What are you doing here? I called out. A drop-off, what's it look like? He grunted. To who? I thought you only did the financial district. Yeah, well, a lot of the banks have moved here. Better facilities, he said, gesturing vaguely at one of the gray blocks. He didn't seem to find it strange that dozens of competing financial institutions had all relocated to the same anonymous, non-existent street. He just accepted it. The city I loved, the intricate, chaotic, beautiful mess of it, was being tidied up, rationalized into a single, sterile corridor. And I was the only one who seemed to remember how it was before. I started taking detours for my own sake, not for deliveries. I'd cycle to places I loved, just to check they were still there. I went to the top of the Bullring car park and looked out. From a distance, the skyline looked the same, the BT Tower, the glass fins of the library, the spires of the cathedral. But I had a growing, terrifying suspicion that if I were to try and navigate to any of them, the paths would betray me. The city was becoming a matte painting, a convincing facade with nothing behind it but the endless funnel to Argent Street. My relationship with Reese frayed and then snapped. I called him, desperate for a human connection that wasn't tainted by this quiet contagion. "Meet me at the Wellington," I said, naming a pub famous for its real Alish near New Street. "Please, Reese. I need to talk." "The Welly?" "Bit of a trek for me now, mate," he said. "What do you mean?" "You work 5 minutes away." There was a pause. "Nah, not for a few weeks. My whole department moved. Much better place now." A cold dread snaked around my heart. "Moved where, Reese?" "Argent Street, of course. It's great, everything's so convenient. Tell you what, there's a pub here, the Foundry. Looks just like the Welly. Meet me here instead." I hung up the phone. I didn't go to the Foundry. I knew I wouldn't find a pub full of character and history. I'd find a cheap imitation, another prop on the stage, and I'd find a version of my best friend with a crucial part of his memory scooped out and replaced with a placid acceptance of the new reality. He was gone. The city had taken him. Paranoia began to set in. Was I being watched? Was I being guided? The hum on Argent Street seemed to be getting louder, or perhaps I was just becoming more attuned to it. I started noticing other patterns. The streetlights on Argent Street didn't flicker randomly, they pulsed in a slow, synchronized rhythm. The shadows cast by the buildings felt wrong, falling at angles that defied the sun's position. I'd catch impossible geometries in my peripheral vision, a corner that looked like it was folded inwards, a window that reflected a sky of the wrong color. These were fleeting glimpses, gone when I tried to look directly at them, leaving me questioning my own senses. I had to understand the nature of this place. If the city was a network of roads, and that network was compromised, what about the network of information? I decided to go to the source, the official memory of the city, the Library of Birmingham. The library was still there, a beautiful ziggurat of interlocking circles, a testament to a civic pride that felt like it belonged to a different era. I felt a surge of hope. This place was solid. It was real. I went straight to the archives, to the map collection. I asked for city plans from the last 50 years, council surveys, ordnance survey maps. I spent hours poring over them, my fingers tracing the familiar lines of roads I could no longer trust. There was no Argent Street. Not in 2020. Not in 2000. Not in 1980. It wasn't a new development. It wasn't a renamed road. It simply did not exist in the documented history of Birmingham. It was a physical fact with no past. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the archive pressing in on me. The hum was here, too. Faint, barely perceptible, but it was here. A low thrum vibrating up through the concrete floor. The library wasn't immune. It was just another landmark on the edge of the abyss, its foundations slowly being eroded by the impossible. As I was packing my bag, defeated, a woman at a nearby table looked up. She was older, perhaps in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a cascade of unruly silver hair. She'd been watching me. "You won't find it," she said, her voice quiet but clear. I froze. Find what? The street you're looking for, she said, her gaze steady. The one that isn't on any of the maps, but is starting to feel like the only place left to go. For the first time in months, a flicker of something other than fear sparked inside me. It was a fragile, desperate hope. I wasn't alone. How do you know? I whispered. She gestured to the pile of books in front of her. They weren't maps. They were local history tomes, business directories, old phone books. I'm a retired archivist. I notice when things go missing. A bakery on Alum Rock Road, listed in every directory since 1952, suddenly vanishes from the record. A whole terrace of Victorian houses in Small Heath, gone. Not demolished. Just erased. The records realign themselves. But sometimes, if you're quick, you can see the seams. She leaned forward, her voice dropping lower. And I've started noticing where everyone goes instead. They all talk about this wonderful new place. This. Argent Street. My name is Leo, I said, my voice hoarse. Elara Vance, she replied, offering a small, sad smile. And I think we have a serious problem. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. Elara became my co-conspirator in a world that refused to acknowledge the conspiracy. We were two islands of memory in an ocean of placid forgetting. Our meetings were clandestine, held not in pubs or cafes. Those were too vulnerable to sudden relocation, but in the few places we felt were still anchored to the old reality. The top floor of the library, the quiet gardens of St. Philip's Cathedral, the towpath of the Grand Union Canal. Elara was methodical, her archivist's mind a perfect counterpoint to my frenetic, road-level observations. While I had the physical proof of impossible journeys, she had the historical context of an impossible destination. Argent Street is a parasite, she declared one afternoon as we sat on a bench overlooking the canal locks at Gas Street Basin. The slow, green water felt ancient and true. It's not building on top of the city. It's feeding on it. It absorbs locations, and more terrifyingly, it absorbs the corresponding memories. She'd found the seams she'd spoken of. Faint traces, like digital ghosts, in online archives. A cached version of a company's website showing their old address, which would be live and updated to Argent Street a day later. A Flickr photo from 2015, geotagged to a location that now, according to Google Maps, was the dead center of an Argent Street office block. The past was being actively, digitally curated to match the new, false present. But what is it? I asked, the question that haunted my every waking moment. Is it aliens? Some kind of government experiment? Elara shook her head, her expression grim. I don't think it's anything so straightforward. Those things have motives we can comprehend: invasion, control, research. This feels more elemental. It's not hostile. It's just efficient. It's like the city has developed a cancer, a single, hyper-efficient cell that all the body's resources are being diverted to feed. Her words chilled me more than any theory of gray aliens or men in black. The lack of malice was the most terrifying part. You can't reason with a geological process. You can't fight a tide. The escalation was quiet but relentless. Argent Street was no longer just one street, it was becoming a district. I'd cycle past its periphery and see the transformation happening in real time at the very edge of my vision. A familiar brick warehouse would seem to shimmer, its texture smoothing out, its windows darkening and resizing themselves. The process was fluid, like a 3D model rendering. Turn away, look back, and the change was complete. Another anonymous gray block stood where a piece of the city's history had been. The Argent District was growing. The people were changing, too. My initial impression of them being placidly content was evolving. They were becoming synchronized. One lunchtime, hiding in an old alley that overlooked a new plaza on Argent Street, I saw hundreds of people emerge from the office blocks. They all walked to the same sterile food kiosks, formed neat queues, ate the same pre-packaged sandwiches, and returned to their buildings at the exact same moment, as if guided by a silent bell. There was no chatter, no laughter. Just the soft shuffle of feet and the ubiquitous, bone-deep hum. The hum was the key. We were sure of it. It was the one sensory input unique to the anomaly. It's a resonant frequency, Elara theorized, her eyes bright with intellectual fire. Something is broadcasting a signal, and the physical matter of the city, and the neural pathways of its inhabitants, is slowly attuning itself to it. It's not just overriding memory, it's overriding reality itself. We had to find the source. If Argent Street was a web, we needed to find the spider. Our investigation led us to a dead end that was, in itself, a terrifying clue. Argent Street had a clear focal point. The further you went along its gently curving path, the taller the buildings became, the more people there were, and the louder the hum grew. It was all leading somewhere. Following it felt like wading into deeper and deeper water. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but we had to know. We walked for what felt like miles down the uncanny valley of the street, the synchronized pulses of the streetlights creating a strobe effect. The hum was a constant pressure in my skull. Finally, we saw it. At the heart of the district, where the hum was loudest, stood a colossal building. It wasn't gray like the others. It was a monolith of pure, seamless black, a hole in the sky that seemed to absorb the light around it. There were no windows, no doors, no signs. It simply was. The hum emanated from it in palpable waves. The heart of it, Elara whispered, her hand gripping my arm. Her face was pale. We watched as people walked towards the monolith. They didn't enter it. There was no way to enter. They simply walked to its base and stopped. They stood there, facing the black wall, their expressions serene, their bodies still. They weren't waiting. They were communing. This was the new center of Birmingham. Not the Bullring, not Victoria Square. This silent, black, unknowable thing. Our alliance was tested not by disagreement, but by despair. Seeing the monolith broke something in Elara. The fight went out of her eyes. We can't stop this, Leo, she said a few days later. Her voice thin and reedy. We were back in the cathedral gardens, but the peace of the place felt fragile, temporary. It's too big. Too fundamental. So we just give up. I demanded. We let it take everything. Perhaps acceptance is the only path, she said, not looking at me. Perhaps it's better than this constant state of friction. It looks peaceful there. I saw it then. The contagion wasn't just in the streets, it was an idea. It was a promise of simplicity, of effortless existence. The struggle to remember, to fight, was exhausting. Giving in was a siren song. Elara, no. That's not peace. It's erasure. Is there a difference? She asked, her voice hollow. The next day, she didn't answer my calls. I went to her flat. The landlady told me she'd moved out. She'd left a note, saying she'd been transferred to a new, prestigious role at the Central Archives. A beautiful new facility. The landlady beamed. So lovely for her, at her age. I didn't need to ask for the address. I knew. The city had taken my last ally. My isolation was absolute. I was alone, a ghost haunting a city that was haunted by something far worse. The choice Elara had faced was now my own. Fight a battle I couldn't win, or surrender my memories and my soul for a life of quiet, humming contentment on Argent Street. My rage overruled my fear. I wouldn't be erased. If the city was a trap, I would find a way out. Not just out of Argent Street, but out of Birmingham itself. I looked at a map of the UK. The M6, the M5, the M42. The great arteries that connected this city to the rest of the country. They were my only hope. I would cycle to the motorway. I would follow it until the hum faded, until the world felt solid again. It was a desperate plan, a final, defiant act. I would escape, or I would be consumed trying. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The confrontation wasn't with a person or a monster. It was with geography itself. I packed a light bag, water, a power bank, my logbook, and the worn A to Z that now felt like a religious text from a dead faith. My target was the M6 motorway, specifically the slip road at Spaghetti Junction. It was the city's most complex piece of engineering, a knot of concrete and tarmac. If any part of the old city could resist, I prayed it would be that glorious, ugly mess. I set off at dawn, the sky a pale, washed-out gray. I didn't use my phone's GPS. I used the map in my head, the one that was becoming more precious and more useless with every passing hour. My plan was to use the main A roads, the city's old spine, hoping their sheer importance would grant them some kind of immunity. I chose the A38M, the Aston Expressway. It's a sunken motorway, a concrete canyon that slices through the north of the city. I pedaled furiously, the wind roaring in my ears. For a while, it felt right. The road was solid, the signs were correct. I saw the turnoff for the city center, the familiar blue signs for the M6 north and south. Hope, fierce and painful, surged in my chest. I took the looping slip road for the M6 north. The incline was steep. I could hear the roar of traffic above me. I was almost there. I reached the top of the ramp, where the road should have merged with the 3 lanes of the motorway. There was no motorway. I skidded to a stop, my front wheel inches from a sheer, impossible drop. Where the M6 should have been, there was nothing but a gray, misty void. The slip road ended abruptly in mid-air. Below me, perhaps 100 feet down, I could see it. Argent Street. It wasn't just a district anymore. It was a basin, a vast valley into which the city was collapsing. The expressway hadn't led me out, it had become a pier jutting out over the abyss. The roar of traffic I'd heard wasn't from the M6. It was the hum, amplified, echoing up from the gray world below. I backed away from the edge, my heart hammering. I tried another route. The M5, via the Hagley Road. The same result. The road stretched, warped, and eventually crumbled into another precipice overlooking the ever-expanding Argent Valley. I tried the A45 towards the airport, my last, desperate hope for a connection to the outside world. The road dissolved into a plaza I recognized from my surveillance, right at the foot of the black, silent monolith. The city was hermetically sealed. The roads no longer led out. They all led in. Despair washed over me, cold and absolute. I was trapped. The city was a stomach, and I was being digested. I sat on a curb, the A to Z map open on my lap, its familiar grid a mockery of my situation. I was about to give up, to let the current take me, to walk down into the valley and find Alara, to stand before the monolith and let the hum scour my brain clean. And then I saw it. On the map. A different kind of line. Not the bold red of an A road or the yellow of a B road. A thin, wavering blue line. The canals. I had used them to bypass a single route, but I hadn't understood. The roads were a new system, a neural network for the contagion. But the canals were older. They were a different system entirely. They didn't care about postcodes or traffic flow. They followed the contours of the land. They were water. Fluid. Ancient. They were the city's veins, while the roads were its compromised nerves. It was a sliver of a chance, but it was all I had. I found the nearest towpath, a grimy, graffiti-scarred entrance I'd ignored 1,000 times. I hoisted my bike down the narrow steps. The moment my feet touched the damp brick of the towpath, the world shifted. The oppressive, skull-vibrating hum lessened, muffled as if by a thick blanket. The air grew still and smelled of moss and diesel. Above me, the concrete underbelly of the city blocked out the sky, but here, at water level, reality felt stable. Solid. I got on my bike and started to pedal. The towpath didn't bend. It didn't shimmer or reroute. It followed the faithful, meandering path of the water. I passed under bridges, through dark tunnels where the only sound was the drip of water and the whir of my chain. I saw the back ends of old factories, the forgotten gardens of terraced houses, the city that was being erased, seen from its secret corridors. I cycled for hours, following the blue line on my map. I was moving, making progress in a way that hadn't been possible on the surface. But I wasn't escaping. After what felt like half a day, the canal opened up into a wider basin. I stopped, getting off my bike, and walked to the edge. I could see the city. Or what was left of it. From this vantage point, I could finally comprehend the scale of the revelation. Birmingham was no longer a sprawling metropolis. It was a concave bowl. The familiar skyline I had seen from the car park was an illusion, a memory. All the lights, all the buildings, all the life I had known were contracting, pulled by an inexorable gravity towards the center. And at that center, the black monolith pulsed with a dark, silent energy, the source of the hum that was the city's new heartbeat. The lights of the outer suburbs were gone, the darkness of the countryside pressing in around the shrinking perimeter of this new, self-contained world. Argent Street was no longer a street. It was the city. I looked at the water. The canal flowed on, a dark ribbon leading out of the basin and into the encroaching night. I could follow it. I could keep cycling along this one, true path. But to where? The system of canals was a closed loop, too. It would take me around the periphery of the captured city, but it wouldn't let me leave. I haven't escaped. I am marooned. I live on the towpaths now. I am a ghost on the city's waterline, a scavenger of the world that was. Sometimes I see other things in the water, the glint of a discarded shopping trolley, the bloated shape of a bin bag, the pale, upturned face of a memory. I ride the liminal spaces, the narrow strip of reality that separates the encroaching nothingness from the quiet, humming horror of the city that ate itself. At night, I sit by the water's edge and look across at the glowing, synchronized hive. The hum is a constant companion, a lullaby from a world I refuse to join. I am the last courier, my final delivery, an undeliverable message to myself. I remember. I still remember. And I wonder how long that will last, with all roads, even the roads in my mind, leading to the same, quiet, all-consuming place, the quiet contagion, the ozone scent. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The first time I noticed it, I blamed the city. Mexico City has a scent for every season, a complex perfume of diesel fumes, sizzling street tacos, rain-washed asphalt, and the sweet decay of jacaranda blossoms. It's a living smell, one you breathe in and become part of. But this was different. This was a clean, sharp, almost sterile smell, like the air after a fierce electrical storm. The scent of ozone. My name is Elena Rosas, and my life is built on the past. As an assistant archivist for the Archivo Histórico de la Ciudad de Mexico, my days are spent in the cool, quiet halls of a colonial-era palace just off the Zocalo. I am a guardian of paper and ink, of faded photographs and brittle maps. My job is to preserve the city's official memory, to ensure that what was, remains. I find comfort in the concrete, in the verifiable fact, in the linear progression of time recorded in neat, chronological files. My world is one of order. The ozone scent first appeared on a Tuesday in early May. I was in the sub-level stacks, retrieving a folio on the 1957 earthquake. The air, usually thick with the musty perfume of old paper and bookbinding glue, had a high, metallic tang to it. I sniffed, my nose wrinkling. It was as if someone had left an industrial air purifier running overnight. "Javier, do you smell that?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the narrow aisle. Javier, my senior colleague, looked up from a delicate manuscript, his magnifying glass dangling from a cord around his neck. He was a man who seemed to have absorbed the dust of the archive into his very being, slow, deliberate, and perpetually clad in a gray cardigan. He took a theatrical, deep breath. "Ah, yes," he said, a small, pleased smile on his lips. "They must have finally fixed the ventilation. It's refreshing, isn't it? Like mountain air." I frowned. Refreshing wasn't the word I'd use. It was clinical, unnatural. It pricked the back of my throat. I chalked it up to new filters or cleaning chemicals and went back to my work, the file on the 57 Quake tucked under my arm. That was the first anomaly. The second came an hour later. Back at my workstation, I opened the folio. My task was to cross-reference property damage reports from the Colonia Roma with a master city plan from 1955. I pulled the rolled map from its cardboard tube, weighed down its corners, and began my work. I knew these streets by heart. My grandmother, Sofia, had lived in Roma Norte her whole life. I traced the path from her old apartment on Calle Orizaba towards the Fuente de Cibeles. But something was wrong. On the map, Calle Orizaba was labeled Calle de la Serenidad. I blinked, leaning closer. The ink was old, faded to the same sepia tone as the rest of the text. It wasn't a recent alteration. It was part of the original document. Impossible. My abuela's stories were my own personal archive, filled with vivid recollections of playing on Orizaba, of the jacarandas that lined its sidewalks, of the bakery on the corner that sold the best conchas. A mistake, I muttered to myself. A cartographer's error, a misprint. It happened. Still, it was a loose thread in the tapestry of my understanding. I made a note on a sticky pad, check Orizaba naming history, and set it aside. The faint scent of ozone seemed to cling to the paper. Over the next week, the smell grew from a faint tang to a constant presence. It was no longer confined to the archive. I smelled it in the metro, a clean note cutting through the press of bodies and the scent of hot rubber. I smelled it wafting from the cafes on my walk home. People commented on it, if at all, with the same strange pleasure as Javier. "The air feels so clean lately," my landlady, Senora Diaz, remarked as I collected my mail. A gift from God. To me, it was beginning to feel less like a gift and more like a warning. It brought with it a low grade. Persistent headache, a pressure behind my eyes that never quite went away. The small inconsistencies at work started to accumulate, like grains of sand forming a dune. A request came in for records pertaining to the old Lecumberri Palace prison. I went to the L section in the political archives. It wasn't there. I checked the cross-reference index. Nothing. Panicked that a priceless collection had been misplaced, I went to Javier. He looked at me with a placid, almost pitying expression. "Elena, what are you talking about? Lecumberri Palace was never a prison. It was the city's first public hospital. The records are under H for Hospital General Lecumberri." "No," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "It was a notorious prison. The Black Palace of Lecumberri. Political prisoners, artists. David Siqueiros was held there." Javier patted my arm, his touch strangely distant. The ozone smell was particularly strong on him, a clean, electric aura. "Mija, you're getting your history mixed up. Siqueiros was a celebrated public artist, a patriot. He was never imprisoned. You must be tired. All this close work." I stood frozen as he walked away. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew about Lecumberri. I had read the testimonies. I had seen the photographs. I rushed back to my terminal, my fingers flying across the keyboard, searching the digital database. The entry for Leckembury Palace described its noble founding in 1900 as a state-of-the-art medical facility. There was no mention of cells or political prisoners. I searched for Siqueiros's imprisonment. The search engine returned articles about his murals, his government commissions, his state funeral. The gaps in his timeline, the years he had spent in jail, were seamlessly filled with fictitious artist residencies and international exhibitions. It wasn't that the information was missing. It had been replaced. Rewritten. My hands were shaking. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and was hit with that smell, that clean, sharp, reality-bleaching scent. It felt like it was coming from the vents, from the computer monitor, from the very air in my lungs. Everyone else seemed to be breathing it in like a tonic, their faces smoother, their brows less furrowed. But for me, it was the smell of erasure. That evening, I went to visit my abuela Sofia. She lived in a small, cluttered apartment in Coyoacán, a living museum of her own 90 years. If anyone held the true record, it was her. Abuela, I began, trying to keep my voice casual as I helped her water her geraniums. Tell me again about your old street in Roma. Calle Orizaba. She smiled, her face a beautiful roadmap of wrinkles. Orizaba? No, Mija. My street was Calle de la Serenidad. Serenity Street. It was a lovely name. Much prettier than a volcano. My blood ran cold. No, Abuela, you always told me. My memory isn't what it used to be, little bird, she said, patting my hand. But some things you don't forget. It was always Serenity Street. She paused and sniffed the air coming through the open window. What a lovely smell. So fresh. It reminds me of something wonderful. Something I can't quite remember. I left her apartment and walked into the violet twilight of Mexico City. The streetlights flickered on, casting a hum that seemed to vibrate in time with the pressure in my skull. The scent was everywhere, thick and cloying now, and for the first time, I felt a wave of dizziness. Looking at the faces of the people passing by, the vendors packing up their stalls, the couples walking hand in hand, I saw the same placid contentment Javier and my abuela had shown. A calm acceptance. I hurried home, the city I loved feeling suddenly alien. In my apartment, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. The ozone smell was here, too, seeping in from under the door, through the window frames. I went to my bookshelf and pulled out a history of modern Mexico I'd had since university, a heavy, well-worn textbook. My hands trembled as I flipped to the index, looking for Leckembury. The entry was there. Leckembury, Hospital General. Page after page described its contribution to public health. The photos I remembered of grim-faced guards and barred windows were gone, replaced with images of smiling nurses and sunlit recovery wards. Even the ink on the pages of my own book, a book that had been in my possession for over a decade, had changed. I slammed it shut, a dry sob catching in my throat. This wasn't a conspiracy. This wasn't a data breach. This was something far more fundamental. The past wasn't being erased. It was being rewritten, and the scent of ozone was the ink. I was an archivist in a city without a stable archive, a historian in a world where history was fluid. And I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The world didn't go mad. It went quiet. The constant, agitated symphony of Mexico City began to change its tune. The blaring car horns seemed to soften into coordinated signals. The shouting vendors lowered their voices into pleasant, melodic calls. The ever-present threat of street crime, a tension every Chilango learns to live with, simply evaporated. News reports spoke of plummeting crime rates, of a new era of civic harmony. Everyone credited the new administration, the cleaner air, a collective shift in consciousness. Everyone was smiling. Everyone but me. For me, the quiet was a deafening roar. The ozone scent, now a permanent feature of the atmosphere, had become my personal tormentor. While others described it as euphoric, for me it was a physical assault. My headaches were now migraines, a constant thrumming behind my eyeballs. I developed a chronic case of sinusitis. I felt perpetually on the verge of nausea. It seemed my body was rejecting the new reality as vehemently as my mind. I began to document the changes in a cheap, spiral-bound notebook with a ballpoint pen. I couldn't trust my computer, couldn't trust any printed book. Only the ink I laid down myself felt safe. My notebook became my sanctorum, a catalogue of a dying world. May 17th, the Angel of Independence. The statue at the top. I swear it used to hold a laurel wreath in its left hand. Today I walked past. It's a scroll. A scroll of civic laws. I checked 20 photos online from last year. All show the scroll. I feel like I'm losing my mind. May 22nd, Javier tried to correct a 1920s land grant file today. He said the original signatory was wrong and wanted to replace it with a name I've never heard of. I told him it was a historical document and couldn't be altered. He looked at me with such profound disappointment. But Elena, he said, his voice soft and reasonable, it's not correct. It needs to be made right. The ozone smell from him was so strong I had to step away. May 29th, the Tlatelolco massacre. It's gone. Completely. The Plaza of the Three Cultures is now officially commemorated as the site of the 1968 Festival of Pan-American Unity. A peaceful gathering celebrating the Olympics. The articles, the memorials, the testimonies, all vanished. I tried to talk to Senor Morales, my boss, about it. He gave me a pamphlet for the city's mental wellness program and suggested I take a leave of absence. My attempts to find an anchor in this sea of change only deepened my isolation. I'd bring up a vanished event in conversation, and people would stare at me with a mixture of confusion and pity, as if I'd insisted the sky was green. "I think you're misremembering," became the gentle, soul-crushing refrain. They weren't gaslighting me. They genuinely believed it. Their memories, their entire perception of the past, had been seamlessly updated. I started to look for patterns. The changes weren't random. They were curative. Painful historical events were smoothed over. Divisive figures were rehabilitated. Urban blight was retroactively erased from city planning records. Calle de la Serenidad was a much nicer name than one associated with a deadly volcano. A hospital was a more noble legacy than a prison. A festival was better than a massacre. The anomaly wasn't destroying history, it was perfecting it, sanding off the sharp edges, applying a thick, glossy varnish of contentment. My isolation drove me online, into the deepest, most obscure forums. I searched for terms like mass memory alteration, environmental reality shifts, sensory-induced historical revision. Most results were fiction or conspiracy nonsense. But then, buried in a thread on a fringe physics forum, I found it. A single, cryptic post from a user named Cassandra_72. "It's not the water. It's the air. A harmonizing frequency carried on an oxidizing agent. They're not erasing. They're tuning. Does anyone else see the old code? Does anyone else remember the noise?" My heart leaped. I sent a private message, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely type. "I see it. I smell it. In Mexico City. The history is changing. Please, who are you?" The reply came 2 days later. "A disgraced astrophysicist from Santiago. Here, it started with the fog. A strange, shimmering quality. People became more agreeable. Old seismic data started to rewrite itself. I was laughed out of the university. Be careful. The signal seeks coherence. Dissonance is identified and smoothed. They don't see you as a person. They see you as an error in the code. An error in the code. That's what I was. A bug in the system. The thought was both terrifying and validating. I wasn't crazy. This was real. Buoyed by this connection, I decided to launch a small investigation of my own. My working theory was that the change was propagating through data networks, with the ozone acting as some kind of catalyst for belief, for acceptance. But what about things that were never digitized? Things that were purely physical, isolated from the network? This led me to the Bodega Muerta, the dead storehouse. It was an archival term for a sealed, off-site storage unit where we kept damaged, uncatalogued, or redundant materials that weren't worth the expense of proper climate control. It was a lead-lined room in the sub-basement of a municipal building 3 districts over, filled with paper forgotten by time and bureaucracy. It hadn't been opened in 15 years. Getting access was a nightmare of red tape. My request was met with confusion. Why would you need to go in there, Elena? All important records have been digitized and backed up on the central server for perfect preservation. It's for a study on paper degradation, I lied, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. It took a week, but my persistence, framed as obsessive academic rigor, finally wore them down. Senor Morales signed the release form with a weary sigh, handing me a large, old-fashioned iron key. "Don't breathe in the mold," he said, his tone that of a parent indulging a child's nonsensical game. The building was a dusty, forgotten monolith of gray concrete. A bored security guard let me into the sub-basement, the air growing cooler and damper with each step down. The door to the Bodega Muerta was thick steel, sealed with a red wax stamp that crumbled at my touch. I turned the heavy key in the lock. The door swung inward with a groan of protest, releasing a puff of air that smelled beautifully, blessedly normal. It smelled of dust, mildew, and time. No ozone. Inside, it was a chaotic library of the lost. Stacks of water-damaged ledgers, boxes of unlabeled photographs, scrolls of architectural drawings that were coffee-stained and torn. It was an archive of imperfections, of mistakes, of unfiltered reality. It was beautiful. I spent hours in the dim light of my headlamp, my fingers black with dust. And then I found it. It was at the bottom of a heavy wooden crate, beneath a pile of brittle, yellowed newspapers from the 1960s. A city planning map. Not a formal, printed one, but a developmental draft from 1954, hand-drawn in ink on heavy vellum. My breath hitched. In the eastern part of the city, in what was now the sprawling, manicured Parque Cuitlahuac, there was a neighborhood. A dense grid of streets, blocks of houses, a small church, a marketplace. It was labeled Colonia Perdida. The Lost Colony. I had never heard of it. No history book mentioned it. No modern map showed it. According to the official, rewritten history in the main archive, that land had always been a park, established in the 1940s as a green lung for the city. But here it was. A phantom limb of the city, documented on a forgotten map in a room that time, and the anomaly, had overlooked. I carefully rolled the map and placed it in a protective tube. This was it. This was my proof. This was the old code Cassandra_72 had written about. An undeniable, physical artifact from the world as it was. As I stepped out of the Bodega Muerta, locking the door behind me, the contrast was sickening. The ozone smell hit me like a physical blow, a wall of clean, cloying air in the corridor. The guard in the lobby, who had been grumpy and sullen when I arrived, was now humming a placid tune, a beatific smile on his face. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked, his voice smooth as honey. "Yes," I said, clutching the tube to my chest. "I think I did." He nodded. "Good. It's always best when things are in their proper place." His words, meant to be casual, sent a shiver down my spine. I hurried out into the late afternoon sun, feeling like a heretic clutching a forbidden text. I had my proof, but what could I do with it? Who could I show it to? To everyone else, this map wouldn't be a revelation. It would be an error. A mistake to be corrected. And I, the one pointing it out, would be the most glaring error of all. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. My apartment became my fortress and my prison. I sealed the windows with packing tape and stuffed towels under the doors, a futile attempt to keep the ozone at bay. The scent always found a way in, a constant, whispering reminder of the world's quiet madness. The map of Colonia Perdita was my secret gospel, my anchor to a reality that was slipping away like a dream upon waking. My correspondence with Cassandra_72, whose real name was Dr. Mateo Vargas, became my only lifeline. He was in hiding in the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth, where the anomaly's atmospheric carrier had little purchase. "It's a field, Elena," he wrote. "Not technological in any human sense. Think of it as a reality state field that seeks maximum stability and minimum entropy. Pain, conflict, tragedy, these are high-entropy states. The field corrects them by retroactively editing causality. The ozone isn't the cause, it's a byproduct of reality being abraded and smoothed over. A symptom of the cure. A cure for the human condition. A cure that required the amputation of truth." The nature of the threat was becoming clearer, and far more terrifying than any virus or alien invasion. This wasn't an attack. It was a planetary immune response, and humanity's messy, painful history was the disease. The affected people weren't puppets or zombies, they were the beneficiaries of this cosmic therapy, their memories edited for their own peace of mind. And the system was beginning to recognize me as a persistent source of dissonance. The escalation was subtle, but unmistakable. My apartment keys stopped working one morning. The locksmith, a cheerful man who smelled faintly of ozone and welding flux, told me the lock was fine, my key must have warped. He made me a new one that worked perfectly. The next day, my credit card was declined. The bank's customer service line was infinitely patient. There was no record of my ever having an account with them. My digital life, my official existence, was being gently and methodically unplugged. The most chilling incident happened at the archive. I had taken the map of Colonia Perdita to work, hidden in my bag, hoping to compare its vellum and ink composition with other documents from the era to further authenticate it. I left my station for only a minute to get a glass of water. When I returned, Javier was standing there, holding the map. He hadn't unrolled it. He just held the tube, his head cocked to one side, a frown of concentration on his otherwise placid face. "What's this, Elena?" he asked. His voice was still soft, but it held a new firmness. "It feels discordant." "It's nothing, Javier," I said, my voice tight, reaching for the tube. "Just some old drafts I'm clearing out." He pulled it back, out of my reach. His gentle, dreamy eyes were focused on me, but it felt like something was looking through them. "It shouldn't be here. It feels like a mistake. A piece of noise. Things should be quiet and clear." For the first time, I felt a flicker of fear. This wasn't just passive acceptance anymore. This was an active, protective instinct. He was a white blood cell sensing an intruder. "Give it to me, Javier," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the tube. "It needs to be filed properly. Under anomalies and cartographic errors. For correction." Correction. The word hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. I lunged and snatched the tube from his hand. His reaction was surprisingly fast. He grabbed my wrist, his grip not violent, but impossibly strong, like the pressure of a hydraulic press. "Elena, please," he said, his voice full of sorrow. "Don't cling to the static. It's so much more peaceful when you let it resolve." Panic gave me strength. I twisted my arm, wrenching free, and backed away, clutching the map. Javier didn't follow. He just stood there, his hand outstretched, a look of profound, tragic pity on his face. "You're just making it harder on yourself," he whispered. I fled. I ran from the archive, from the Zocalo, from the heart of the city, not stopping until I was breathless and dizzy in the anonymity of the metro. The people on the train were quiet, their faces serene. An infant that started to cry was instantly soothed, its mother rocking it gently while humming a simple, consonant tune that seemed to calm the entire carriage. I was the only one with a frantic pulse, with the stench of fear mingling with the clean, pervasive ozone. I was being edited out. My history, my identity, my very presence was an error being flagged for deletion. I needed an ally, someone here, on the ground. Mateo was a voice of reason from thousands of miles away, but I needed a physical witness. My mind latched onto a name, Professor Alarcón. He was a retired, famously cantankerous historian from UNAM, a notorious contrarian who had built his career on challenging official narratives. If anyone would relish the idea of history being secretly rewritten, it would be him. He had been a mentor of mine in university, a man who taught me to question everything. Finding him wasn't easy. He was no longer at the university, and he had no online presence. I eventually tracked him down through an old colleague to a small bookshop in San Angel. The shop was a dusty haven, blessedly free of the ozone's cloying sweetness. Alarcón was thinner than I remembered, his magnificent white hair now a bit wilder, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He peered at me over his spectacles. Rosas? Elena, rosas? My God, you look like you've seen a ghost. In his cluttered back office, over cups of bitter, lukewarm coffee, I told him everything. I spoke in a low, rushed whisper, expecting him to laugh or call me insane. Instead, he listened intently, his fingers steepled, his sharp eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, I unrolled the map of Colonia Perdida on his desk. He stared at it for a long time, his breath held. He gently touched the vellum, tracing the phantom streets with a trembling finger. Perdida, he breathed. I remember hearing whispers of this when I was a boy. A shantytown, cleared for the park. But the stories, they faded. I always assumed it was just a local legend. He looked up at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something other than placid confusion or pity in someone's eyes. I saw the thrill of discovery, the fire of a fellow truth-seeker. This is monumental, he said, his voice electric with excitement. This is proof. A physical anchor. They can rewrite the digital world, they can overwrite memory, but this is ink and paper. It has weight. It has a past. A wave of relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees washed over me. I wasn't alone. We spent the next 2 days in a fever of research, poring over Alarcón's private library, a collection of rare and controversial texts he had hoarded for decades. We found oblique references, forgotten footnotes, hints of other historical corrections. He was brilliant, his mind a razor cutting through my panicked theories, formulating a plan. We can't fight the phenomenon itself, he reasoned, pacing the small office. But we can create a sanctuary. An island of true memory. We need to find more artifacts like your map. We need to build a new archive, an archivo incorrupto. We have to preserve the dissonance, Elena. The noise is where the truth lives. He was scheduled to give a small lecture at a private historical society in a week. It's the perfect place, he said, his eyes gleaming. A small group, old families, people who pride themselves on their connection to the real history. I won't talk about the phenomenon directly. I will present the map. I will talk about Colonia Perdida. I will plant the seed of doubt. We will see who is still capable of being woken up. The day of the lecture arrived. I met Alarcón at the entrance to the society, a beautiful Baroque building in the Polanco district. He was immaculately dressed, the map tube held under his arm like a baton. Ready to make some history, my dear, he said with a wink. But as we walked into the lobby, something felt wrong. The air inside was thick with ozone, heavier and sweeter than I had ever smelled it. It was like walking into a cloud of the stuff. My head swam, and a wave of nausea rolled through me. Alarcón, however, didn't seem to notice. He took a deep breath, and a strange look of peace washed over his sharp features. Ah, he sighed. Wonderful air system they have here. So invigorating. Professor? I said, my voice barely a whisper. The smell. It's fine, Elena. It's clean. He turned to me, and the fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a calm, serene glow. The same glow I saw in Javier, in my abuela, in everyone. Professor Alarcón, I stammered, holding his arm. The map. Colonia Perdida. Remember? He looked down at the tube in his hand with mild confusion, as if seeing it for the first time. Ah, this. Yes. A curious little piece. He patted my hand, his touch gentle and dismissive. You know, Elena, I was thinking on the way over. My theory was all wrong. So unnecessarily complicated. Full of conflict. He smiled, a wide, beatific smile that did not reach his eyes. It's so much simpler. This map is clearly a forgery. A rather imaginative one, but a fiction nonetheless. The land was always a park. It's a much better story that way, don't you think? More harmonious. He gently removed my hand from his arm and walked toward the lecture hall, leaving me frozen in the lobby. My last ally, my bastion of defiance, had been assimilated in the space of a single breath. He hadn't been threatened or coerced. He had simply been cured. I looked at the serene faces of the Historical Society members milling around me. I saw the map tube in Alarcón's hand. I knew what was going to happen. He would present it as a curiosity, a historical fiction. They would all nod and agree. The map, my one piece of solid proof, would be neutralized, recontextualized into a harmless fantasy. The noise would be harmonized. The error corrected. And I was standing alone at the epicenter of the correction. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. There was no confrontation. There was only a choice. I fled the Historical Society, leaving Alarcón to his newfound peace. I walked for hours, a ghost in my own city. The map tube felt impossibly heavy, a dead weight pulling me down. I ended up, as if by instinct, at the Plaza de los Tres Culturas in Tlatelolco. The air here was thick with the scent, sweet and heavy like overripe fruit. It felt like the source was near. The plaza, once the site of so much bloodshed and grief, was filled with families. Children laughed and chased pigeons around the Aztec ruins. Couples sat on benches before the imposing colonial church. Students from the nearby housing complex lay on the grass, reading. It was the picture of tranquility. The 1968 Festival of Pan-American Unity, the event that never happened, felt more real in this moment than the massacre I stubbornly remembered. There was no pain here. No memory of soldiers' boots, of screams, of blood on the stones. The city's greatest trauma had been excised with surgical precision, and the scar tissue was a beautiful, thriving public space. Was this so wrong? My migraine was a roaring inferno behind my eyes. The dissonance between my memory and the world around me was a physical agony. Every serene face was an accusation. Every peaceful scene a testament to my own flawed, painful perception of reality. The effort of remembering, of holding on to the truth, was utterly exhausting. I sat on a stone bench, looking at the harmonious blend of the three cultures, Aztec, Spanish, modern, that gave the plaza its name. The anomaly hadn't destroyed them. It had perfected their union, removing the conflict that had defined their history. This wasn't an invasion. It was a form of grace. A terrible, suffocating, memory-devouring grace. What was I fighting for? The right to remember pain. The preservation of tragedy. My version of the past was filled with prisons, massacres, earthquakes, and lost colonies. Theirs was filled with hospitals, festivals, parks, and serenity. A young woman sat down on the other end of my bench. She smiled at me, a simple, open, uncomplicated smile. The ozone scent was a pleasant perfume around her. "It's a beautiful evening, isn't it?" she said. "Sometimes, I feel like I can't remember a time when the city didn't feel this peaceful." I looked at her, at the genuine contentment in her eyes. I looked at the laughing children, at the placid sky. I thought of my abuela, her manufactured memories giving her a happier past. I thought of Javier, finding joy in making things right. I thought of Alarcón, relieved of the burden of his own cynicism. They weren't wrong. They were healed. I was the one who was sick, clinging to a disease called history. The choice became terrifyingly simple. I could continue this fight, becoming more isolated, more fragmented, until my own mind shattered from the strain or my existence was gently but completely edited out of the system. I could be a ghost, a piece of static, howling a truth no one could hear. Or I could breathe. I held the map tube on my lap. Colonia Perdida. The lost colony. A place of poverty and struggle, erased to make way for a beautiful park. My proof. My burden. My pain. Slowly, deliberately, I unclenched my jaw. I relaxed the muscles in my shoulders. I stopped fighting the air. I took a breath. A deep, conscious inhalation of the ozone-laced atmosphere. It didn't hurt. For the first time, the scent wasn't sharp or clinical. It was cool, clean, and profoundly calming. The fire behind my eyes didn't vanish, but it subsided to a warm glow. The knot of anxiety in my stomach loosened. I took another breath. The edges of my memories began to soften. The sharp, painful details of the Tlatelolco massacre blurred, the sounds muffled, the images fading like old photographs left in the sun. It was being replaced by a vague, pleasant feeling. A festival. Music. Yes, that felt right. It felt better. I looked down at the map tube in my hands. Colonia Perdida. The name sounded strange, jarring. A fiction. Why was I carrying around a tube containing a fantasy map? It was disorderly. An error. A piece of junk mail cluttering up my life. A public trash receptacle stood a few feet away. It seemed like the right place for it. The proper place. A mistake to be discarded. I stood up, my movements feeling fluid and light for the first time in months. I walked to the bin and dropped the tube inside. It landed with a hollow clatter, a sound of finality, of resolution. A profound sense of relief washed over me. The relief of putting down a heavy burden you didn't even realize you were carrying. The headache was gone. The nausea was gone. The fear was gone. I turned back to the plaza. It was so beautiful. So harmonious. A perfect testament to the city's long history of peace and unity. My city. I felt a surge of quiet, uncomplicated love for it. I took another deep, clean breath, and smiled. The air was so fresh. It always had been. The game with no rules. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My name is Kenji Tanaka. And my world is built on frameworks. As a school psychologist at Kitayama Elementary, a modest institution nestled in the northern suburbs of Kyoto, I deal in the architecture of the young mind, the anxieties that build like crooked walls, the traumas that crack the foundation. I diagnose, I document, I apply methodologies. My office is a small, soundproofed room smelling of laminated wood and green tea, a sanctuary of reason against the chaotic symphony of the schoolyard. My life, like my work, is ordered. I take the Karasuma line to work, I eat a bento box prepared by my own hands, I return to my sterile apartment in Nakajaya Ward. The city's ancient heartbeat, the thrum of its temples and the whisper of its gardens, is mostly background noise to the predictable rhythms of my existence. The first tremor in this foundation was a girl named Yuna Saito. She was 6 years old, with eyes that seemed too large and too old for her face. Her teacher, Ms. Abe, a woman whose earnestness often tipped into alarm, referred her for disassociation and social withdrawal. In my office, Eunice sat perfectly still on the oversized chair, her small feet in their white Iwabaki slippers dangling inches above the floor. She didn't fidget. She didn't cry. She simply watched. Yunichan, I began, my voice calibrated to its most soothing frequency. Ms. Abe is a little worried. She says you haven't been playing with the other children during recess. Can you tell me why? She looked not at me, but at the corner of the room where the ceiling met the two walls, as if reading a subtle text there. Her reply was a whisper, devoid of inflection. I am playing. Oh. What game are you playing? I asked, leaning forward with a practiced, encouraging smile. Her gaze remained fixed on the corner. The watching game. The watching game, I repeated, jotting it down on my notepad. I don't think I know that one. Does it have rules? Some, she said, still not looking at me. You have to count the shadows when they move. I paused, my pen hovering over the paper. A child's fantasy, of course. Poetic, even. Shadows move when the sun moves, Yunichan, I explained gently. Or when someone walks past a light. No, she said, with a quiet finality that was deeply unnerving. Sometimes they just move. I spent the rest of the session trying to steer her toward more conventional topics, her family, her favorite foods, the new anime about magical hamsters. She answered in monosyllables, her attention always drifting back to the inert corners of my office. I concluded my initial report with predictable notes, possible stress at home, difficulty adjusting to the social pressures of first grade. I recommended observation and further sessions. I filed it away and moved on to a case of playground bullying. It was mundane, understandable. It was solid ground. A week later, I had Sora Tanaka, no relation, in my office. A boisterous, energetic second grader, he'd been sent to me for drawing on his desk. Again, routine. But when I asked him what he was drawing, he pushed a crumpled piece of paper across my desk. It wasn't the usual mess of superheroes or monsters. It was a meticulous, complex geometric pattern, lines folding in on themselves at impossible angles, creating a shape that seemed to have more dimensions than it should. It made my eyes hurt to look at it for too long. What is this, Sora-kun? A safe place, he said proudly. It's very detailed, I managed. Where did you see it? I didn't see it, he said, looking at me as if I were a bit slow. You build it in your head when you watch. There it was again. That word. Watch. Are you playing the watching game, too? Sora's face lit up, a conspiratorial grin spreading across his face. You know it? Are you a watcher? Before I could answer, he leaned in and whispered, here's a good rule, don't blink in the mirror. Not for a long time. It shows you the wrong face. I felt a cold prickle on my neck. It was the dissonance, the way he delivered this piece of chilling advice with the same glee another child might share a cheat code for a video game. I spent the afternoon searching online. Watching game, shadow counting game, kids mirror game. Nothing. No new app, no viral challenge, no obscure manga. It was a ghost in the machine. Over the next 2 weeks, the ghost began to materialize. For more children were referred to me, all for similar reasons. Lack of focus. Staring into space. Quietly humming tuneless melodies. They were all playing the game. They all knew the rules, though they were more like cryptic commandments. Listen to the shape of the silence. Find the door that isn't there. The color gray is a lie. Each child was a separate data point, but together they formed a constellation of profound strangeness. The drawings were the most tangible evidence. They all drew the same impossible architecture, Escher-like corridors and spiraling towers that defied gravity. They drew symbols, too, sharp, angular sigils that looked like a cross between kanji and circuit diagrams. They would draw them on scraps of paper, in the dust of the playground, with a wet finger on a windowpane. I tried to rationalize it. A shared fantasy, blossoming in the fertile soil of the playground and spreading like a meme. Children are suggestible. One imaginative child, Yuna perhaps, could have invented the whole mythology. It was a compelling theory, one that allowed me to maintain my professional footing. That footing crumbled on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My last appointment of the day was with a third grader named Rena. She was sharp, articulate, and less withdrawn than the others. She spoke about the game with an unnerving lucidity. "It's not about winning, Tanaka-sensei," she explained patiently, as if to a toddler. "It's about seeing." "Seeing what, Rina-chan?" I asked, my notepad feeling flimsy and useless in my hand. "The parts that are underneath. The real classroom." She gestured around my office. "This room is like a drawing. The real room is behind it. And the game helps you see it. The game is practice. The watching is the real thing." I decided to push. To find the source, the patient zero of this psychological contagion. "Who taught you the game, Rena? Did you learn it from Yuna? Or Sora?" She shook her head, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "We all learned it at the same time. In Abe-sensei's classroom." We heard the voice. My breath caught. A voice? "Someone came into your classroom?" "No," she said, her eyes finally meeting mine. They were calm, clear, and utterly convinced. It was the voice behind the chalkboard. The rain hammered against the window. The scent of wet asphalt and my lukewarm tea filled the room. All my frameworks, my methodologies, my carefully constructed understanding of the world, felt like a house of cards in a hurricane. A voice from behind a chalkboard. A game with no rules played by silent children who stared at corners and drew maps of places that couldn't exist. The unsettling mundane had finally shed its skin, and I was looking at the raw, twitching nerves of something I had no name for. My job was to fix broken things, but I was beginning to suspect that these children weren't broken. They were being remade. I walked home that evening, foregoing the train. The neon signs of Kyoto blurred into watercolor streaks on the wet pavement. I saw a group of children, not from my school, huddled under a 7-Eleven awning. They weren't talking. They weren't playing on phones. They were standing stock still, their heads cocked at the same slight angle, all of them staring intently at the flickering dance of a faulty streetlight. Watching. My sterile apartment didn't feel like a sanctuary that night. It felt like a stage. And as I brushed my teeth, I found myself staring at my own reflection, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. I fought the insane, childish urge not to blink. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The next morning, I started a new file. Not an official school document, but a black, hardbound notebook I bought at a stationery shop near Shijo Street. On the first page, I wrote, "The Watching Game." Beneath it, I started a list, Yuna S, Sora T, Rena H. I documented the phrases, the rules. Count the shadows. Don't blink in the mirror. The voice behind the chalkboard. I tried to sketch the symbols from memory. My clumsy lines a poor imitation of the children's unnerving precision. This notebook became my anchor and my obsession, a private lexicon for a world that was tilting off its axis. The phenomenon was no longer confined to the quiet ones. I saw it everywhere. During lunch break, a game of tag would abruptly halt as one of the players froze, their eyes fixed on the texture of the brick wall. In art class, the brilliant finger paintings of flowers and houses were being replaced by monochromatic, geometric abstractions. The symbols began appearing, chalked onto the pavement outside the school gates, etched into the soft wood of a park bench. One afternoon, while walking along the Kumo River, I saw one of the larger, more complex symbols painted crudely on a concrete abutment under the Gojo Bridge. It was fresh. The game wasn't just in my school. It was leaking. My professional duty compelled me to act, but I didn't know what action to take. I requested a meeting with Principal Ito. He was a stern man in his late 50s, a bureaucrat who saw the school as a complex machine that needed to run smoothly and without complaint. I sat in his office, the scent of expensive ink and old paper a stark contrast to my own modest room. I laid out my concerns, trying to couch them in the acceptable language of psychology. I've observed a pattern of behavior, a sort of shared ideation spreading among a significant number of students. It's causing distraction and social withdrawal. Principal Ito steepled his fingers. Tanaka-sensei, these are children. They have fads. Last year it was collecting bottle caps. The year before, it was that ridiculous dance from the internet. It will pass. With respect, Ito-kocho, this is different, I pressed, my voice tighter than I wanted. The consistency of the imagery, the specific phrases. One child, Rina Hoshino, mentioned a voice behind the chalkboard as the origin point. I believe something may have happened in Ms. Abe's classroom. His expression hardened. A voice behind the chalkboard. Are you suggesting a hallucination? Mass hysteria? Tanaka-sensei, your job is to provide practical solutions for struggling students, not to entertain fantastic theories. The parents are concerned about test scores, not imaginary voices. Address the behavioral symptoms. Help them refocus. That is all. The meeting was over. I had been dismissed not with anger, but with a weary condescension that was infinitely worse. I was the school psychologist, the supposed expert on the mind, and I was being told that my observations were fanciful. The isolation, which had been a creeping chill, now felt like a thick wall of ice. My attempts to speak with other teachers were met with similar results. Ms. Abe, the teacher from the classroom where it all began, was the most receptive, but even she was walled off by her own fear. I don't know, Tanaka-sensei, she said one day in the staff room, nervously stirring her tea. They're quieter, yes. More intense. But they're not causing trouble. If I raise a formal concern, what do I say? That they're staring too hard? That their drawings are strange? They'll think I can't control my class. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. It's just a phase. It has to be. She was choosing to believe it was a phase because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. I couldn't blame her. I was contemplating it, and it was eroding my sanity. I began to feel like a spy in my own life. I documented everything. The way the watchers, as I'd started calling them, would sometimes move in subtle synchrony, turning their heads in the same direction at the same instant, as if responding to a silent cue. The way their humming, when overheard in a group, would occasionally resolve into a complex, discordant harmony for a few seconds before dissolving back into tunelessness. My research became more desperate. I spent my evenings in the Kyoto Prefectural Library, surrounded by the hushed quiet of genuine scholarship. I dove into books on urban folklore, Shinto mysticism, pre-Buddhist animist beliefs. I searched for the symbols in databases of heraldry, religious iconography, and ancient scripts. Nothing. They were unique. It felt less like rediscovering something old and more like witnessing the birth of something entirely new and alien. To escape the mounting pressure, I began visiting my great-aunt Chio, who lived in an old wooden machiya in the Gion district, a world away from my modern apartment. She was 87, her back bent like a willow branch, her mind still as sharp as a shard of glass. I thought, foolishly, that her connection to an older Japan might offer some insight, some forgotten folktale about shadow-counting children or voices in the walls. She would serve me bitter tea and listen patiently as I described the children's behavior in vague, careful terms. Children have their own worlds, Kenji, she said one afternoon, her gaze distant as she watched a cat sun itself in her small garden. When I was a girl, we believed that the tsukumogami, old tools and objects, would come alive on their 100th birthday. We would leave offerings for the spirit of the old well. The world was full of eyes then. Perhaps it is again. Her words were beautiful, but they were a comfort of a world that no longer existed. They were stories. What I was witnessing was not a story. It was an event. Aunt Chio's wisdom was a red herring, a path into a past that held no answers for the present. Her world of well spirits felt quaint and harmless compared to the cold, systematic nature of the watching game. The isolation deepened. I was a man of science and reason, adrift in a sea of impossible data. Was I the one losing his mind? Was I projecting my own anxieties onto the harmless games of children? The thought was a constant, gnawing companion. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and wonder if I was counting the wrong things, listening to the wrong silences. The secondary mystery, the subplot to my own quiet madness, was the board itself. The chalkboard in Ms. Abe's first-grade classroom. It became the focal point of my investigation. What had happened there? Was it a gas leak that caused a shared, temporary hallucination? A low-frequency sound emitted from faulty wiring? I submitted a formal request for an environmental quality check on the classroom, citing parental concerns about allergens. It was a flimsy pretext, but Principal Ito, eager to be seen as proactive, approved it. The tests came back a week later. Air quality, normal. Materials, normal. No sonic anomalies detected. The chalkboard was just a chalkboard. But the game was escalating. It was no longer just passive observation. I saw a group of watchers in the playground, pacing out the length of their own shadows with meticulous, measured steps. They weren't playing, they were calibrating. Another time, I saw Yuna, the first girl, holding a small, cheap plastic mirror, not looking at her reflection, but angling it to catch the reflection of an empty stretch of wall, her expression one of intense concentration. I was losing them. Every day, they drifted further away from the shore of our shared reality. And as I watched them, I realized with a jolt of pure terror that the loneliness wasn't just about being disbelieved. It was about being left behind. They were all moving together into this strange new world, and I was the only one still standing in the old one, shouting into the wind. One evening, I stayed late, long after the last teacher had gone home. I let myself into Ms. Abe's darkened classroom. The air was still and cool. The ghosts of children's laughter seemed to hang in the air. I walked to the front of the room and stood before the chalkboard. It was slate gray, wiped clean, smelling faintly of chalk dust. It was utterly, terrifyingly ordinary. I reached out a trembling hand and pressed my fingertips against its cool, smooth surface. I expected nothing. A part of me, the rational psychologist, desperately wanted nothing. But I felt it. It wasn't a shock or a vibration. It was a resonance. A faint, deep thrum that seemed to travel up my arm and into the base of my skull. It wasn't a sound, it was the idea of a sound. And for a fleeting, sickening instant, the geometry of the room seemed to lurch. The corner of my eye caught a flicker, a brief superimposition of another place, a vast, cavernous hall with a ceiling that soared into impossible heights, just like in the children's drawings. I snatched my hand back as if burned, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It wasn't a game. It wasn't hysteria. The chalkboard was a door. And something had opened it. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The sensation lingered for days. A phantom thrum in my bones, a visual static at the edge of my vision. The world felt thin, like a painted screen. My notebook became my only confidant, its pages filling with frantic scrawls, theories spiraling into madness. Is it technology? An infrasound device planted in the wall? A broadcast? Or is it older? A genius loci, a spirit of place, awakened? The chalkboard isn't the source. It's an antenna. My alliance, when it came, was born of tragedy. Sora Tanaka, the boy who had drawn the impossible architecture, was the first to be truly lost. He wasn't physically harmed. In a way, it was worse. A janitor found him in the school library long after sunset. He was standing in front of a large window that overlooked the darkened school grounds, tracing one of the game's symbols onto the glass with his finger, over and over again. He was whispering, so quietly the janitor could barely hear him. "Don't blink in the mirror. Don't blink in the mirror. Don't blink." When they brought him out, he was placid, his eyes wide and unfocused. He didn't respond to his name. He didn't seem to recognize his frantic parents. He was a shell, the vibrant, energetic boy replaced by a silent, staring automaton. He was institutionalized. The official diagnosis was a sudden-onset childhood schizophrenic episode. A tragedy. An anomaly. But I knew it wasn't. He hadn't broken. He had finished the game. He had stared into the mirror, or the window, its nighttime reflection, and hadn't blinked. He had seen the wrong face, or perhaps, the right one. Sora's collapse shattered Ms. Abe's denial. She appeared at my office door the next day, her face pale and drawn, her usual earnestness replaced by raw fear. "You were right, Tanaka-sensei," she whispered, closing the door behind her. "It's not a phase. What's happening to them?" For the first time, I wasn't alone. The relief was so profound it almost made me dizzy. We sat for hours, sharing everything. I showed her my notebook, the symbols, the phrases, my theory about the chalkboard. She, in turn, told me things I couldn't have seen. How the children's silence had a texture, an active, listening quality. How they would sometimes orient themselves in the classroom not toward her, but toward the chalkboard, even when she was speaking. "It started the day after the new interactive whiteboard was installed," she said, her eyes widening as the connection sparked in her mind. "The old chalkboard is still there, behind it. The technicians were drilling back there. They might have disturbed something. A new whiteboard. Technology laid over the old. A signal being amplified? Or a barrier being breached? Our collaboration became a frantic, whispered conspiracy. We were two sane people in a world that was quietly, politely going mad. We created a map of the school, marking the locations where the children's watching was most intense. The patterns were not random. They corresponded to nodes, the classroom with the board, a corner of the library, a specific tree in the playground, a drain pipe on the north wall of the gym. It was as if they were mapping a network, an invisible architecture superimposed on our own. The theory we pieced together was terrifying. The watching game wasn't a game at all. It was a tutorial. A user's manual for a new form of perception. The children, with their neuroplasticity and lack of rigid mental frameworks, were the perfect receivers. The voice was a signal, and the chalkboard was its transmitter, broadcasting the baseline operating system for a different reality. The phrases were not rules, but operational safety warnings. Count the shadows when they move was a lesson in object permanence for entities that existed outside our visible spectrum. Don't blink in the mirror was a warning about the fragility of identity when faced with a glimpse of your own extra-dimensional self. Listen to the shape of the silence was about learning to parse data from the absence of sound. The stakes escalated beyond the school walls. Reports began to surface in the local news, written off as curiosities. A traffic jam on the Oikdori, caused by a dozen people inexplicably stopping their cars to stare at the facade of the Kyoto City Hall. A sudden, citywide power flicker that corresponded with no known grid failure, during which witnesses reported seeing strange colors in the sky. I knew these weren't isolated incidents. The signal was getting stronger, or the number of receivers was growing. Adults, more resistant and set in their ways, were beginning to be affected, their rational minds interpreting the input as confusion, migraines, or moments of profound distraction. Our alliance was tested. Ms. Abe, a teacher to her core, wanted to save the children. She suggested covering the chalkboard, ripping out the new whiteboard, anything to sever the connection. "We can't," I told her, the words tasting like ash. What if the connection is what's keeping them stable? Sora didn't break because of the game, he broke when he completed a part of it. Cutting them off might be like waking a sleepwalker on a tightrope. It could be catastrophic. The horror of our situation settled upon us. We couldn't fight it. We couldn't fix it. We could only watch. We had become players in the game, unwillingly. One night, driven by a fear that was beginning to curdle into a strange, academic curiosity, I returned to the school. Ms. Abe had given me her key. I had to know more. I brought a digital audio recorder and an EMF meter I'd bought online, pathetic tools of my reality against the vastness of theirs. The school was an eerie tomb. My footsteps echoed in the halls. When I entered Ms. Abe's classroom, the feeling was stronger than ever. The air was thick, charged with a static that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The EMF meter, which had been silent all the way to the school, immediately began to chatter, the needle spiking as I approached the chalkboard. I set up the recorder and stood before the board, my heart a frantic drum. I didn't touch it this time. I just watched, trying to emulate the children. I focused on the blank, gray surface, filtering out everything else. I listened to the shape of the silence. Slowly, terrifyingly, it began to work. The thrumming returned, not in my hand, but directly in my mind. The visual static at the edge of my vision coalesced. The room didn't lurch this time, it dissolved. For a heart-stopping second, I saw it. The real room. The vast hall from the drawings, its walls glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. I saw impossible geometries arching into a swirling, nebula-like darkness where a ceiling should be. And I saw figures. Tall, slender silhouettes that moved with a liquid grace, their forms indistinct, like heat haze or shadows given life. They were there, just on the other side of the slate, observing me with an unnerving placidity. A whisper slithered into my thoughts, a voice made not of sound but of pure information. It was cold, clear, and ancient. The watcher is watched. I screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure terror. I scrambled backward, tripping over a desk, and crashed to the floor. The vision shattered. I was back in the classroom, the only sounds my own ragged breathing and the frantic ticking of the EMF meter. I had looked through the keyhole. And something had looked back. The threat wasn't a virus or a toxin. It wasn't malicious, not in any way I could comprehend. It was simply, presence. An adjacent reality, bleeding through a weak spot in our own, and its very nature was rewriting the perceptions of anyone sensitive enough to notice. The children weren't being infected, they were being updated. And the consequences of that update, for a mind not built to handle it, were devastating. I had my insight, my terrifying piece of the puzzle. The problem was, I now knew with absolute certainty that there was nothing I, or anyone, could do to stop it. We were not in a war. We were simply in the way of a tide. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The experience in the classroom broke me. My carefully maintained professional facade crumbled, leaving only a raw, terrified man. I took a leave of absence from the school, citing stress and burnout. Principal Ito was all too happy to grant it. I was a problem he could file away. Ms. Abe called me, her voice fraught with worry, but I could barely form coherent sentences. The memory of the real room was seared onto the back of my eyelids. The whisper, "The watcher is watched," was a constant echo in the quiet of my apartment. My isolation became absolute. I was a man with knowledge that was not only unbelievable but dangerous to possess. To know was to be noticed. To be noticed was to be changed. The thrum was always with me now, a low-level hum beneath the audible world. Shadows in my peripheral vision seemed to twitch and coalesce. I stopped looking in mirrors altogether. I had to know how it ended. Or if it ended. My terror had been burned away, leaving behind a cold, fatalistic compulsion. I had to see the players. I had to see the final move of the game. On the night of the full moon, a week after my leave began, I was drawn back to the school. I don't know why that night. Perhaps it was a pull I couldn't perceive, a silent summons. I didn't take an EMF meter or a recorder. I took only myself. The school grounds were bathed in the pale, ethereal light of the moon. I vaulted the low fence, my movements feeling strangely fluid, preordained. I knew where to go. Not the classroom. The playground. They were there. About a dozen of them. Yuna, Rena, and others I recognized. They weren't playing on the swings or the slide. They stood in a loose circle in the center of the sandpit, a place I now understood to be one of the nodes. They were perfectly silent and still, their faces upturned to the sky, their expressions serene. They were not watching the moon. They were watching something I couldn't see, something superimposed over the familiar stars. As I approached, none of them turned. It was Yuna who spoke, her voice clear and resonant in the night air, yet she didn't seem to move her lips. The words formed directly in my mind, just as the whisper had. "You came, Tanaka-sensei. What is this?" I asked, my own voice a harsh croak. "What are you doing?" "Learning," came Rena's thought voice, gentle and patient. "The teacher is giving a lesson." The voice from the board. "The board is a window," Yuna corrected. "The teacher is everywhere. It shows us how to see the real shape of things. The world you see is a shadow of our classroom." There was no malice in it, no threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the simple certainty of a child explaining that the sky is blue. They weren't lost souls. They were the first graduates. They were pioneers, charting a new territory of consciousness that was layered directly over my own. They weren't being taken from our world, their world was simply overriding it. "It isn't a bad place, Sensei," Sora's voice whispered in my mind. I flinched, searching the circle, but he wasn't there. The thought came from everywhere and nowhere. "It's just, bigger. You don't have to be afraid. You just have to watch." This was the confrontation. Not a battle, but a choice. An invitation. They opened a space in their circle for me. I could see it, a subtle shimmer in the air, a place where the thrum was strongest. I could step inside. I could let go of the frameworks, the methodologies, the man named Kenji Tanaka who tried to make sense of a world that was never meant to be sensible. I could learn the game. I could see what they saw. The promise of it was terrifying, and deeply, seductively alluring. To finally understand. I looked at their calm faces, their ancient eyes. I looked at the empty space in the circle. A doorway into a reality that buzzed just beneath my skin. I took a step forward, my foot hovering over the sand. The thrum intensified, the world flickering at the edges, the impossible architecture threatening to resolve itself before my eyes. And I ran. I turned and fled, my heart a wild animal in my chest. I didn't stop until the school was a distant silhouette and the city lights of Kyoto closed in around me, a comforting, familiar lie. Underscore 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 underscore. 6 months have passed. I never returned to Kitayama Elementary. I live now in a small room in Arashima, on the western edge of the city, near the bamboo groves. I work part-time, stocking shelves in a convenience store. The work is simple, mechanical. It requires no frameworks. But I am not the same. The contagion is in me. It is a quiet contagion. I didn't escape it, I only refused the final lesson. The thrum is my constant companion. I see the nodes, now, places where reality feels thin. A certain paving stone in front of the Tenryuji temple. The way the light pools under an old willow tree by the Katsura River. I haven't succumbed, but I have been altered. I exist in the liminal space between the two worlds. My perception is permanently skewed. Sometimes, if I don't concentrate, the sharp lines of a building will seem to curve in on themselves for a moment. I see the symbols everywhere, not chalked on walls, but in the natural patterns of bark, in the cracks of drying mud, in the arrangement of stars on a clear night. They were always there. The game just teaches you how to read them. I carry a small notebook, not for research, but for relief. When the pressure of the thumb becomes too much, I draw. My hand moves of its own accord, sketching the impossible, angular sigils, the spiraling corridors. It quiets the noise. It focuses the vision. It is my own private version of the game. This evening, I sit on a bench overlooking the river, the last tourists of the day heading for the train station. I am not watching them. I am watching the shadows stretch and deepen as the sun sets behind the mountains. I am counting them, just to see if they move. Across the river, on the far bank, a small group of children has gathered. They are silent, still. They are not looking at the sunset. They are looking across the water, directly at me. One of them, a girl I don't recognize, raises a small hand, not in a wave, but in a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. In their placid, watching eyes, I see a flicker of recognition. I am no longer just the psychologist. I am a player now, a novice. The game is not over. It is just beginning. And all around me, in the silent, beautiful city of Kyoto, more and more people are learning the rules.